Chapter 24. Because he moved at the same time Paul swung his hand, he was able to dodge it by a hair length. But before Gustav could completely return his body to a normal position, Paul had already raised his knee with force. Paul's right knee was currently headed for Gustav's stomach, and there was no way he could dodge it in time, so Gustav quickly placed both of his arms in front of himself to block the knee. Bang! The knee slammed into Gustav with explosive force, throwing him into the air in a backward motion. Crack! Gustav's wrist's bones had cracked from the impact as he flew backwards with a slight look of pain. Regeneration has been activated. As he traveled in an arc across the air, a notification popped up in his line of sight. Paul had already dashed out again towards Gustav as he was still being sent flying across the air. His fist headed for Gustav's stomach as he descended. Gustav, who was still in midair, saw the fist coming towards his stomach, and with no way to counter it, he finally activated dash. Activate dash, he said internally. The fist approaching suddenly slowed down a bit. Gustav stretched out his hands towards the fist and pulled himself upward using it. Using that to jump forward, he was close to colliding with Paul's upper body. He suddenly raised his knee with force. Blam! Gustav's knee slammed into Paul's jaw, stopping his initial movement. Paul was dumbstruck by the sudden hit as he stared forward, only to see that Gustav had disappeared. Huh. He turned around with a dumbfounded look only to receive another hit. Blam! Gustav threw a punch to Paul's face. The punch wasn't as effective as earlier due to Paul's increase in strength, but it was still heavy. Blam! 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 Gustav's speed was too fast for Paul to follow, so he kept getting punched repeatedly. By the time he would throw his fist out, Gustav would have dashed towards his back. This happened until dash time was exhausted and Gustav went back to normal. The narrative changed again as Gustav became on the receiving end without the speed of dash. Gustav kept evading and receiving punches as he thought of ways to deal with Paul. I can only use dash one more time. Gustav was thinking about how to make dash effective, because at his current strength level, he wouldn't be able to make Paul passed out within that 10 seconds of repeatedly pummeling him. Pow! Gustav received another hit, sending him tumbling towards the edge of the rooftop. He nearly fell from the top of the 100-story building. He stared at the bottom with a look of fear as he remembered the mountain. He quickly came back to his senses, remembering that he was still having a fight, but as he stared forward back, Paul had already arrived in front of him. Grab! Paul grabbed him by the neck and lifted him. Gustav started punching and jabbing to no avail. Paul moved forward while clutching Gustav's neck. Gustav was now hanging by his neck and also hanging from the edge of the rooftop. "This is where your life will end," Paul stated as he moved slightly forward again. Gustav stared at the below with a visible look of fear on his face. He was currently thinking of a solution as fast as he could. He still clenched onto Paul's hand with both his hands while trying to free himself. Paul arched back his left hand as he tightened his fist. "Goodbye," he uttered. Just as he wanted to throw his fist forward, Gustav spoke, muttered something. "Add all 5 points to strength." Paul, who didn't hear what he said, clearly paused his fist and asked, "What did you say? Your last prayer?" "Plus 5 points have been added to strength." Gustav suddenly felt a rush of energy coursing through his veins immediately after the notification popped up. If he could see his biceps, he would be able to witness the physical change it went through in a blink of an eye. "Well, you must have said your prayers finished by now. Goodbye." Just as Paul swung his fist, Gustav spoke in his mind. "Activate dash." Swoon. The fist traveled towards him in slow motion again. Gustav clenched on the hand of Paul, tightly causing him to release his grip. Still using that same hand, Gustav swung forward like a monkey and landed several feet in front, on top of the roof. Paul's fist phased through thin air, without making contact with flesh like he expected. He noticed that Gustav had disappeared from his front again. "Only 8 seconds left, so I have to make it count." Gustav's words only lingered in the air. By the time Paul heard it, a punch was already headed towards his jaw. Bang! This time the sound was way louder than before as the tiles under Gustav's feet cracked due to the immense force generated back to his body after his fist collided with Paul's jaw. Paul hadn't expected it to be this powerful, so the force not only shocked him but also overwhelmed him. Paul was catapulted backward with blood and teeth flying out of his mouth. By the time he came back to his senses, he noticed that the rooftop was no longer in his line of sight. Instead, he could see the top of a tall, uncompleted building gradually getting farther and farther from him as an intense breeze blew through his body. Huh, am falling? These were the last words he uttered before his large body slammed against the hard, cold ground. Plop. Gustav's chest was heaving up and down as he stared at his right fist. Did I just kill a person? Gustav walked towards the edge of the rooftop and stared at the human body on the ground covered in a pool of blood. Hung Joe and Ben stared at Gustav from behind. Monster. You're a monster. You have killed Paul. The both of them voiced out with a scared look. At first, Gustav was very scared as the concept of killing a living thing was very new to him. He wanted to say it was an accident, and it truly was, but then he remembered that this same person was trying to kill him a while ago. He turned around and stared at the two of them with a dark and devilish look. No one knows about what has happened here except for the both of you, and that recording device over there which I will destroy now. Gustav spoke as he started walking towards them. The both of them flinched, and Hung Joe quickly brought out his device and tried to call a number. Swoosh! Gustav suddenly appeared in front of him and kicked the rectangular device away from his hand. Crash! The device slammed into the ground and broke into fragments. Now you both, actually you three, but the other one is dead now, so you both have made me suffer, made me wish for death, make me hate my existence. Wouldn't it be fair for me to return the favor? Gustav looked like he had absolutely lost his mind at this moment as he grabbed both of them before they could run. Nu. Pyar. Cries of pain enveloped the place as sounds akin to slaps and punches rang out. About 10 minutes later, when the skies were starting to darken, Gustav stood in front of Paul's body that had its head cracked. Paul would have survived had it not been that he transformed back into his human form before making contact with the ground. Gustav squatted and placed his hands on Paul's body to lift him when several notifications popped up in his line of sight. Requirement for bloodline acquisition has been met. Analyzing host compatibility with beast transformation bloodline 0% per 100%. Analysis complete, 87%/100%. Host compatibility with beast transformation bloodline is 87%. Does host desire to steal this bloodline? Yes/no. Gustav's eyes widened as he stared at the familiar notifications. Chapter 25. Does host desire to steal this bloodline? Yes/no. Gustav's eyes widened as he stared at the familiar notifications. Is it because of his blood? Gustav wondered as he stared at Paul's blood-soaked body. He quickly disagreed with his thoughts because when he was battling with Paul the other time, he had already made contact with Paul's blood, but the system notification didn't pop up. I must use this opportunity to figure out what the requirement for bloodline acquisition is. He dropped Paul's body and squatted while inspecting it. What's that? He noticed something on Paul's neck area. What's with that color? It looks crimson, but why does it glow? Gustav noticed the blood oozing from Paul's neck was different from the normal blood. It was glowing crimson. The glow wasn't a very bright one, but it was visible. It made the blood look like jam. Thick but glowing and oozing out slowly. I have never seen this type of blood. Could that be why? Gustav didn't waste time before touching that part of Paul's corpse again. Requirement for bloodline acquisition has been met. Analyzing host compatibility with beast transformation bloodline 0% per 100%. Analysis complete, 87%/100%. Host compatibility with beast transformation bloodline is 87%. Does host desire to steal this bloodline? Yes/no. The same notifications as earlier appeared one by one in his line of sight again. It truly is. Gustav had a lot of thoughts going up in his head right now after confirming that this was a requirement for bloodline acquisition. Yes, Gustav consented to the acquisition of Paul's bloodline. Although Gustav felt he might be disrespecting the corpse this way, he also felt letting the bloodline of a beast go to waste would be a waste. Also, this was a defining moment for him. It was the first time he would be acquiring a bloodline that belonged to another person. Host has decided to acquire this bloodline. Bloodline extraction shall now begin. Gustav saw the same notifications that popped up when he mistakenly tried to steal Miss Amy's bloodline. Miss Amy. Gustav remembered that he met the requirements without needing to touch this weird crimson blood. That means this is not the only way to steal a bloodline. Gustav came to this conclusion as he watched the process of extraction. Bloodline extraction process, 2%/100%. Unlike the other time with Miss Amy, the percentage bar was increasing. Not only was it increasing, Gustav could feel and see the process. His hands that were currently on Paul's neck glowed a bright red-crimson color. A trail of visible crimson veins could be seen on Paul's neck, connecting down to his body below. Gustav was starting to have a feeling of crisis, so he was hoping for the extraction process to be fast because he had someone else's bloodline to steal before leaving. That bloodline will be the most convenient to clean up this mess, Gustav started calculating in his mind. After 2 minutes, a notification rang out in his mind again. Congratulations! Host has acquired Beast Transformation Bloodline. Hidden quest completed. Gustav saw the 2 notifications, but now was not the time to be excited or shocked. The feeling of crisis was becoming stronger every second he spent here. His mind was constantly sending him warning bells, but he couldn't leave here without covering his tracks. He might as well just prepare for jail time or death if he left things unfinished here. He quickly ran back up to the top floor using dash. Internally, he thanked his stars that he didn't distribute the attributes points for the completion of today's task earlier, at school. If he had done that, he wouldn't have been able to escape death. Gustav got back to the top floor where Hung Jo and Ben were laying on the ground passed out. Their 4 limbs were bent in an unimaginable angle. They weren't dead, only passed out, but the look of pain was still visible on their faces along with traces of snot and tears. How I wish I could also steal yours. Gustav took a glance at Hung Jo before moving towards Ben. Your bloodline should be able to help me in fixing this mess. Gustav squatted as his hands reached out for Ben's body. 30 minutes later, Gustav got home. The skies were dark by the time he entered his home. His mind was still chaotic and fuzzy from everything that happened today, but he didn't see anything wrong in what he did. He didn't kill Paul on purpose, but Paul would have killed him on purpose if he didn't fight back. He knew that with this he had caused a major mayhem because Hung Jo happened to be the son of a billionaire. After they find him, they would do everything in their power to catch the culprit and also try to fix what he did to Hung Jo, but he knew that was impossible. With what he did to Hung Jo, he was sure they could never find a solution for it. Gustav sat inside his tub, and before he knew it, he had slept off. He was already mentally and physically drained from all the events that played out today. He didn't even remember to check the hidden quests and the rewards he received from completing them. Bolin Group Construction Site 7 at the top floor of the uncompleted building where the battle took place earlier. A group of men in black tight-fitted bodysuits stood in front of 2 young teenage boys laying on the ground. Yes, we just found young Master Hung with one of his aides, but their situation is a bit hard to describe. One of them was communicating with another person. The small blue glowing button was on his forehead was what made this possible. Their situation is inexplicable. The one with the button on his head squatted to stare at the teenage boys. The both of them had their eyes open, but they looked lifeless. Young Master Hung. The man called out to him, while shaking the one on the left. There was no reaction or answer. The man heard the person on the other end say something which made him react with a surprised look. You're on your way here. 1 month later, just like that, a month had gone by. Gustav was currently headed for school at this time. His mind went back to last month's events as he walked to school. The events that transpired in the last 1 month after Gustav stole a bloodline for the first time were ones he would never be able to forget. After the whole incident at the uncompleted building, Gustav was considered a suspect by the investigators even after everything he did to cover up. It was a real shitstorm. It was all over the news that President Joss' last son had been turned into an invalid. It was on the lips of every media outlet. The president had vowed to crush whoever was responsible. According to the press, he even hired a special team of mixed bloods to investigate secretly. The normal authorities came for Gustav while the special team followed the trail of a popular mixed blood criminal, Ovalid, who was said to use this style to deal with his victim. Students were there when Gustav was challenged by Paul. The authorities linked Gustav to the incident through that. They asked if he showed up. He denied, of course, and told them he didn't have the guts to appear there. Gustav was taken to the station for the first time. Of course, his parents didn't give a damn and left him to the authorities. Gustav kept explaining to them how his bloodline was trashy and he wouldn't be able to harm any one of them. This was proven when they checked his grade and truly found out that he was an F grade. Gustav was lucky that they didn't ask the school for his initial bloodline grade. The incident at the cafeteria came up. They asked Gustav how he was able to show such strength with his so-called trashy bloodline. Gustav had to admit to using enhancement drugs which they found plausible. The cops had tried using a technological device that could scan the surroundings of a crime scene and display the events that occurred within the last 24 hours in that said crime scene, but it didn't work. This made them believe that they were truly dealing with a professional mixed-blood criminal and decided to let Gustav go with the last question. Where were you when the incident happened, and who can attest to being a witness to that? Gustav had words stuck in his throat as he racked his brain for a good and plausible lie to come up with. His saving grace was when a particular person showed up at the station. He was with me. He would never forget that sweet feminine voice that was his saving grace. Miss Amy. It shocked Gustav greatly when he saw her appear within the room he was being questioned, and also speaking up for him. Miss Amy seemed to have quite the reputation. After she vouched for Gustav, he was immediately set free. He was lucky they didn't use the brain tweak device that was said to pick the mind of a person. Normally this device would make a person's mind visible to them, but they only used it in extreme cases. This was an extreme case, but Gustav wasn't a confirmed suspect after all their investigations, especially when they found out that he had a low-grade bloodline. Logic said he couldn't win against a Zulu-ranked mixed blood with a D-grade bloodline, so the device wasn't used on him. The device was also dangerous to people under the ages of 20. When Gustav was leaving the station with Miss Amy, he ran into a man with dark brown hair clad in a blue business suit. The way the man stared at him made a chill run down his spine. Till now he couldn't forget the glare of the man. He looked like the type of person who didn't value life. Miss Amy played the role of guardian and stood in front of Gustav while glaring back at the man. The man backed down and headed towards the room that Gustav was just released from. He and Miss Amy left the station together, but not a single word was exchanged between them. Surprisingly, the sense of wariness he always felt around Miss Amy had disappeared. Come to my office after classes tomorrow. She uttered these words before leaving in her hovering green cycle. Gustav remembered that he was still serving punishment, but before he could remind her, she had already zoomed off with her hover bike. Surprisingly, he got to school the next day and found out that his punishment had been canceled. His thoughts since that time had been circulating around one question. Just who is Miss Amy? Chapter 26. Just who is Miss Amy? His mind had been circulating around this question. Not only was Miss Amy able to make the cops release him immediately, but she also made the disciplinary committee cancel his punishment. An ordinary teacher wouldn't be able to do that. Although he was feeling a little suspicious about her unknown background, Gustav didn't feel wary about her anymore. After all, she knew what he did that last month. Even though his punishment was over, Gustav still headed to school very early as it had already become a part of him. Boss Danzo gave him a job. It was only per time, but Gustav earned up to 5,000 rad in the last month. Rad was the currency used in Plankton City. It was comparable to pounds back in the old days. The 5,000 was what Gustav used to disguise whenever he spent the stolen compensation money he got from Hung Joe. I still need to learn how to properly use this bloodline. Gustav slightly raised his right palm as he walked to school. Only Gustav could see the small light above his palm that formed the image of an atom. Ended up turning him into a vegetable instead of what I originally planned. Well, anyway, it all worked out for the best, Gustav thought. I just need to be more careful and subtle next time. If not for Miss Amy's intervention, things might have gone south. I will still need to keep training with it. After all, there are lots of test subjects in school. Gustav arrived at school as he came to this conclusion. He entered and went straight to the school's kitchen. While passing through the corridor on the left, Gustav greeted some of the cooks here. Hey Gustav. Good morning, Mrs. Carleen. Good morning, Gustav. Good morning, Aunt Lauren. Hey little man. Good morning, Sir Dom. Gustav greeted the familiar faces and entered the main kitchen. You're late again, brat. Boss Danzo's voice was the first thing he heard upon entering. Good morning to you too, Boss Danzo, Gustav replied with a smile. Wipe that smile off your face. You may be able to fool young maidens, but not me, humph. You were masturbating all night, weren't you? Gustav's laughed out loud upon hearing that. Yes, Boss Danzo. I still have your beautiful daughter's picture in my room, Gustav replied. You cheeky brat, get over here. Boss Danzo also laughed as he pulled Gustav over to his side. Boss Danzo had some new recipes to teach Gustav. He went ahead and explained the details while showing him the ingredients needed. After all was said and done, Boss Danzo moved to the side to watch Gustav work. Gustav was like a machine with the way he moved. He was so fluid in cutting, adding spices, washing, boiling, frying, etc. Watching him from the side made Boss Danzo feel a sense of pride. If only this lad would just become my successor, I would proudly be able to beat my chest anywhere, Boss Danzo muttered with a slight look of disappointment. He had asked Gustav about this before, but Gustav turned him down already. Boss Danzo kept asking, but Gustav's answer was still the same. Gustav never knew Boss Danzo had such a thick skin until Boss Danzo cooked one of the most exotic and delicious meals specially for him and asked again after Gustav had finished downing all the food. Gustav had a look of guilt when he turned down Boss Danzo again. Boss Danzo decided to ask him what his plans for the future were. I would like to join the MBO. When Boss Danzo heard this reply, he was nearly heartbroken. Son, I don't mean to pour a cold bucket of water on your head, but that dream might just be an impossible one, Boss Danzo replied. Boss Danzo remembered that Gustav had a low-grade bloodline and didn't want him to keep facing the humiliation he had always been going through. This was the second reason for his proposal. Of course, the first was because of his assimilation and talent for cooking. With the life of a chef, there was no need to fear being discriminated against. Neither was there anyone who would bully him. He wouldn't have to get acquainted with people who could be potential backstabbers. Son, it's good to have dreams, but chasing some kind of dreams could end up tearing you apart, physically and mentally, Boss Danzo added. Being a chef might be a simple life, but it isn't a treacherous road filled with deception and discrimination. Gustav felt like something was welling up underneath his eyes upon hearing Boss Danzo's speech. He had never been as moved as the way he at that time. No one had ever spoken to him with so much concern for his future. There was no dishonesty, no underlying schemes or anything, just pure concern for another person's well-being. It made him feel some kinds of emotion that he had already buried deep down. At the time of the conversation, Boss Danzo was surprised to see Gustav suddenly bow. Thank you. Boss Danzo, hey kid, what are? I'm sorry, but I have made up my mind to go on that path. Be it full of treachery or discrimination. I will overcome all. The confidence in Gustav's voice when he spoke shocked Boss Danzo greatly because from what he heard, Gustav was supposed to be a wimp. HNMM, that's a true man right there. Boss Danzo placed his hand on Gustav's shoulder. It's all right. Your resolve is admirable, Boss Danzo added. Gustav smiled in response. I will not waste the opportunity this power has granted me, the opportunity to reach the top. Just don't overdo it. If you feel it's becoming too difficult, you have a place to run back to with me. Boss Danzo ended their conversation with this. Ever since that time, Boss Danzo hadn't disturbed Gustav about being his successor. He had decided to fully support him in whatever way he could, which was why he gave him the job, regardless of the opposition of others. He observed Gustav from the side and muttered, "This lad seems to be growing very fast." He noticed the school uniform that Gustav wore was tightening around his body and also the slight budge around his arms. Looks like pumping him with a lot of food was a good idea. Boss Danzo had a pleased look as he spoke. Truly, Gustav's body had become bulkier within the past 2 months. His height, which was around 48 earlier, was now about 53. His increase in growth was obvious. As his face grew more handsome, his look became colder. His attitude was slowly turning to be like that of Miss Amy. In the middle of the day, they had extracurricular activities. The students in Class 3 were asked to head towards the mixed blood training hall. Normally, Gustav wouldn't have access to the training hall, but after the incident, Miss Amy also found a way to make the school grant him access to it. They were taught the basics of how to use their bloodline abilities properly in a fight. Of course, Gustav was still keeping things on the low, so whenever they had extracurricular activities like this, he only watched the teacher's performance and registered some of the training in his mind. He would never join the students in any form of sparring because he was sure he wouldn't be able to hold himself from beating them up. Things were still the same as before. Gustav still got cold treatment from a lot of students, but he wasn't bothered by it anymore. Secretly, he hoped someone would come looking for his trouble, so he would have another bloodline to steal. He didn't want to have to join them for the extracurricular activities, but according to Miss Amy, he could train here, hone his abilities, and test out his strength. There were small personal rooms within the training hall where a mixed blood could train separately without being watched. It would seem that Miss Amy secured one for him, and he had used it the 2 times he was here last. Gustav stood in front of a large square-shaped piece of equipment. It was being held up by a pole that extended from above. The surface of this equipment was pitch black. Huff! Gustav breathed in and pushed his body backwards a bit, while arching his right arm back to the limit. His posture right now looked like that of a person learning martial art. His back was curved in, his buttocks shot out, and his legs spread wide apart. Phew! He breathed out and thrust his arm forward with force. Pow! His fist made contact with the square-shaped equipment, causing a loud ringing sound. Trang! 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 Numbers started appearing on the surface of the square-shaped board. 1,000, 1,500, 2,500, 3,500, 4,000, 5,000, 6,000. The numbers came to a stop after reaching 6,200. Gustav stood straight and stared at it. The power of my punch is equivalent to 6,200 pounds now. Gustav held his chin as he contemplated. That's an increase of 500 in the past 1 week, but if I were to use the beast transformation bloodline coupled with my normal strength, it should shoot higher than this. Gustav wanted to try this when he remembered something. Miss Amy is gonna kill me if I don't become a Zulu-ranked mixed blood today. On remembering this, he sat down on the smooth floor. I have to channel my bloodline through the 4th point today, he said, and proceeded to close his eyes. Chapter 27. I have to channel my bloodline through the 4th point today, he said, and proceeded to close his eyes. Gustav had learned a lot about bloodline channeling these past 2 months. To keep increasing in the ranks of bloodline, meditation is necessary. Meditation where you'd have to channel your bloodline repeatedly for hours so it could keep multiplying and increasing in quantity and quality. The training was also necessary and repeated use of your bloodline abilities. Gustav focused and let his mind reach the deepest parts of his body inside. He was able to sense where the 3 bloodlines in his body, but he was only after channeling his original bloodline through the 4th point today. After a few minutes, the sound of bubbling water could be heard inside the small room. Purr, 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 purr. If a normal person walked in here, they would think a person was boiling water. Only a mixed blood would understand what that sound meant. The sound was coming from Gustav's body. A few moments later, the sound stopped and Gustav opened his eyes. That was surprisingly easy. Gustav held his chin as he spoke out loud. He had successfully channeled his bloodline through the 4th point. He thought it would take at least a few hours, but to his surprise, it took him only 10 minutes. Maybe it's because it has saturated, but I haven't been paying attention to it, Gustav said as he stood up. Right now, he could perceive the increase in strength within his body. After channeling the blood through the 4th point, he noticed a strange phenomenon happen within his body. The 4 channel points connected together, forming a small circle. According to what he had heard, crossing to the next rank had to do with the circle formed. Well, anyway, I'm a Zulu-ranked mixed blood now, which means I have met the requirement for participating in the MBO entrance exams. Thinking to this point, Gustav had a rush of excitement forming within him. I only have to stay low-key for now, but once that entrance exam begins, I will go wild, Gustav muttered with an excited look. Let me test out my new strength. Gustav smiled as he turned to face the square-shaped board hanging in midair. Gustav adopted the pose he used earlier on, arching his arm back to the limit, gathering his strength into that arm, especially his fist, and thrusting it out with full force. Pow! The sound of collision rang out again, this time like a knockout as Gustav's fist collided with the board. Trang! 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 Just like earlier, numbers started appearing on the surface of the board. 1,000, 3,000, 6,000, 9,000, 12,000. Gustav's eyes widened as he stared at the figures with a look of surprise. That's up to 100% increase in strength. He spoke with a disbelieving expression. Gustav hadn't expected that his strength would go up by this much after becoming a Zulu ranked. His fist weighed around 6,000 pounds before, but now it had increased to 12,000 pounds. He reckoned that if he was as powerful as this when going against Paul the other time, the situation would have gone in a different format. In the process of his contemplation, a notification popped up in his line of sight. Host has completed the goal. Reach Zulu rank. Oh, I had a feeling there was going to be something like this. Gustav stared at the notification with a smile. Goal reward. Host. Genetic transformation bloodline has been upgraded. Another upgrade. It should have moved up to D by now. Gustav called for the system interface to open up after coming to this conclusion. Host attributes, skills and abilities, bloodlines, quests, shop. The red wall appeared in his line of sight, and he wasted no time in calling out, bloodlines, genetic transformation bloodline A grade. E+ abilities tied to bloodline frowny face morph, joint movement, size manipulation, beast transformation bloodline grade. E abilities tied to bloodline frowny face partial mutated bull transformation, atomic manipulation bloodline A grade. E abilities tied to bloodline frowny face disintegration of atomic structures. The beast transformation bloodline was that of Paul's, while the atomic manipulation bloodline was that of Ben. After successfully extracting them, they were reduced to grade E. At first, Gustav was a little bit disappointed, but then he remembered he could upgrade bloodlines with this power, so he knew that with time, the bloodlines would reach their highest potential, becoming more powerful than their original state. Gustav stared at the panel with a look of contemplation. So there's a grade E+. He had expected his bloodline to increase to D grade since it was formerly E. My bloodline seems to have unlocked a new ability. Gustav noticed size manipulation, which wasn't among the abilities tied to his bloodline earlier. Last month, after collecting the bloodlines of Paul and Ben, Gustav received the notification for the completion of a hidden quest. Host has completed hidden quest. Hidden quest details. Acquire a bloodline within the frame of 2 months after receiving this power. Quest rewards, new skill unlocked, sprint, 10,000 EXP, plus 2 attributes points added to all stats, skills and abilities level up, punishment for failure, death. At first, Gustav thought he would complete a hidden quest related to Paul's challenge, but he couldn't have been more wrong when he saw this. When he saw the rewards, he was really happy about it, but when he saw the punishment for failure, a chill ran down his spine. If this was before he confirmed the power of the system, he would have said it was just a bluff, but now that he knew there were no lies related to the system, he was truly scared about the concept of failing a hidden quest without knowing and ending up dying. If I had been a little late in stealing a bloodline, I wouldn't be alive right now. It had been 2 months already since he got the system. If he had chosen to be a wimp and not fight back, it would not have led to the situation of acquiring those bloodlines, and he would be dead by now. It seems this power doesn't want a wimpy host, Gustav thought with a straight face. If that is the case, then I shall become ballsy enough to do all that is required to keep it and show that I am truly deserving of it. Gustav had sworn to cast his old self aside. He had sworn not to hesitate to do things the way he truly wanted. He had sworn not to back down and run from people like he used to before. 2 weeks after the incident, Gustav completed the monthly quest which upgraded his bloodline from F to E. He had expected that it would be upgraded to D now, but he understood that there was an E+ before upgrading to D. He was at least glad that he got a new ability out of it. Size manipulation. Gustav held his chin as he stood in the middle of the room. The name says it all, but to use it, do I just imagine which size I want to grow to or something? Gustav wondered and decided to try it. He stared at his hand and thought about it growing bigger. After waiting for a few seconds, nothing happened. It doesn't work that way? Gustav held his chin in contemplation. For confirmation, he tried imagining his leg get bigger this time, and the result was the same. It would seem it doesn't work for relative parts of the body, so let me try this instead. Gustav closed his eyes and felt his whole body at once. Increase. Immediately Gustav called out this word in his mind. His body suddenly bloated. Crack him. Crake him. Bone-popping sounds reverberated across the room as Gustav's body grew to a height of over 3 meters. Bulge. 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 His muscles expanded crazily, making him look extremely macho as he kept increasing in size. He could see the floor get farther and farther away from his sight. Bam! His head ended up colliding with the ceiling. Ouch! Gustav exclaimed as he quickly imagined his body becoming smaller so it would stop growing in size. Gustav's body first stopped growing in size before it started to reduce. After a few more seconds, Gustav had gone back to his original form. That was really something. If I hadn't stopped myself, I probably would have kept growing in size. Gustav stumbled forward a bit as he spoke. What's wrong? He held up his hand and noticed that it was blurred in his vision. Warning. Low energy. Warning. Low energy. Warning. Low energy. Gustav heard the ringing in his head and could see the blurry notification in his line of sight. Even though it was blurry, he understood the message it was trying to convey. I set up almost all my Lineage use of that transformation. Gustav was barely hanging on as he analyzed. Host will go into sleep mode if energy isn't consumed. Host will go into sleep mode if energy isn't consumed. Gustav's vision was turning red as the warning bells kept ringing in his head. Where do I find Lineage? Gustav dragged his trembling body forward slowly as he muttered. The storage device. Gustav came to a realization and brought out a small button inside his breast pocket. Chapter 28. He wasted no time before tapping the surface. Truant. A projection of 4 things was displayed. The first was a rectangular-shaped board. The second was a wad of cash arranged in a neat row. The third was a small briefcase, while the fourth was a piece of oven-like equipment. Gustav tapped on the image of the oven-like equipment, and it appeared right in front of him. It was 2 meters in height. He could feel his consciousness fading away, but he still struggled to open up the large, oven-like equipment. Upon opening it up, the space within it had foods of different kinds. Snacks, juicy meats, etc. Gustav quickly grabbed onto a juicy-looking large piece of meat. He opened his mouth wide and stuffed it inside. Chew, 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 chew. Chewing sounds were heard as Gustav ripped the meat to shreds in seconds inside his mouth. +1 energy point has been recovered. Gustav didn't stop after seeing that notification. There were tons of food inside the oven-like equipment. Gustav brought them out one after the other, and a huge feast began. +1 energy point has been recovered. +1 energy point has been recovered. +1 energy point has been recovered. The way Gustav's cheeks bulged due to the amount of food stuffed in made it look like it would burst open. Nevertheless, he kept stuffing one food after the other into his mouth. Crunch, crunch, crunch. A mixture of bakes, fries, meat, fish, almost everything could be seen here. Gustav had been keeping a lot of food that he never had the opportunity to taste for almost 10 years. He enjoyed eating a lot, and had these foods kept down for easy access, who knew that they'd come in handy today. In a few more seconds, Gustav had neatly finished the stash of food he kept within the large, oven-like equipment. Shroov. The doors behind slid up, and a female sporting long gray hair could be seen walking into the room through it. She was clad in a yellow long coat, blue top, and mini skirt with black pop socks. She had a look of indifference written all over her face as walked in gracefully and lightly. Gustav stood up from the floor upon noticing her presence. "Miss Amy?" he muttered while gulping down the food in his mouth. "Hey, we're leave." Miss Amy was in the process of speaking when she noticed something. "Why are you naked?" she questioned while glaring at Gustav. "Huh, naked?" Gustav asked with a confused look before turning his head to look down. "Ah." His eyes widened, and he quickly covered his little brother, which was exposed. When he used size manipulation earlier, his uniform was ripped to shreds. He didn't notice at that time that he was naked due to low energy. "Miss Amy, why didn't you knock?" Gustav's face was currently beet red as he stood behind the large oven placed in the middle of the room. "Why would I? I paid for this room after all," Miss Amy stated. "Gustav, why is this place in such a mess?" Miss Amy questioned as she walked further. She noticed the large oven-like equipment in the room and also the slightly cracked ceiling. "Miss Amy, would you leave so I can, put on some clothes?" Gustav asked with a look of embarrassment. "Why? Just go ahead and put on something if you want to. I'm not stopping you," Miss Amy replied with an indifferent look and sat on the bench placed beside the wall. "Gustav, You have forgotten so soon about when you barged into my office. Didn't you also see my nakedness?" Miss Amy added. "Miss Amy, you have forgotten that you nearly killed me." Gustav pointed at himself as he spoke. "And I didn't see everything." He wanted to add this, but he decided to keep quiet. True. If you have the strength, you should come and try to kill me also." Miss Amy folded her arms while staring at Gustav as she proposed. Gustav nearly puked out blood. "She's such a bully." Miss Amy had a straight look on her face. She didn't even look bothered in the slightest. "Well, I will just close my eyes for a few seconds. Use that time to cover your disaster," Miss Amy stated and proceeded to close her eyes. Disaster? What does she mean by disaster? Gustav's face was still red as he quickly picked a cloth from the storage device. In the blink of an eye, he had already worn the cloth. He was now putting on a clean-looking sky blue jeans trouser and a red hoodie jacket. "Phew!" he sighed in relief after covering up and raised his head to stare at Miss Amy. Miss Amy's eyes were wide opened. "Eck, Miss Amy, since when have those eyes been open?" Gustav flinched back in shock as his face became red again. "Who knows? I already saw your pitiful-looking thumb, so it doesn't matter," Miss Amy replied with a casual look. The way she said it with such aloofness made Gustav want to sink into the floor. "Let's go," Miss Amy said and proceeded to stand up. Go where?" Gustav questioned with a dumbfounded look. "The dojo," Miss Amy answered without turning around. "But school activities aren't over yet," Gustav replied with a confounded look. "Have you forgotten what today is?" Miss Amy said. Gustav stood in place for a few seconds before his face shone with understanding. "Oh, I remember today is supposed to be Parents and Teachers Meeting Day." Gustav recalled that days when this meeting was held, school activities would end earlier. He had already been in here for 1 hour, so he wasn't aware that school activities had ended for the day. Students were currently heading to their homes. The parent and teachers meeting never involved the students, so they were free to leave if they wanted to, though some usually waited for their parents. Miss Amy stared at Gustav, trying to note his expression when he mentioned the parents and teachers meeting. "All right, let's go, Miss Amy," Gustav said while walking forward. Gustav didn't need to ask Miss Amy why she wasn't attending the meeting when she was a teacher because he knew she didn't like such gatherings. According to her, seeing all those parents act all rich and mighty gave her the urge to spit on their faces. He doesn't seem as concerned as he used to. Or is he hiding it? Miss Amy watched as Gustav walked towards her with a look of contemplation. Gustav didn't seem bothered that his parents wouldn't attend the meeting to represent him, which surprised Miss Amy, because Gustav always shown a kind of sad reaction whenever anything related to his parents was mentioned. They left the small training room and arrived at the corridor that led outside the hall. Students could be seen walking out also. They stared at Miss Amy and Gustav moving together. Some of them still had looks of bewilderment, even though it had been happening for the past month. Most of them still wondered why Miss Amy would bother associating herself with the so-called trash of the school. Even when a lot of talented students tried to impress Miss Amy, she was never interested in any student. She had no favorite students or any of those things that other teachers did, which was why they were surprised when she suddenly started showing interest in Gustav. No one spoke a single word about this since Miss Amy was present at the moment. They didn't want to get on her bad side. Gustav and Miss Amy arrived outside the hall and proceeded to climb on her hoverbike that was parked outside. Gustav held on to Miss Amy's waist from behind as she started the engine. Swoof. There was no noisy sound, instead it sounded smooth. The hoverbike lit up from behind and streaked into the distance, carrying them both. The winds blew Gustav's hair to the back as he held on to Miss Amy, who was currently speeding with the hoverbike. Swee-eye, swee, swee-eye. They passed by the sides of several vehicles moving on the road as they sped off. They were supposed to be wearing helmets, but Miss Amy hated helmets. According to her, it spoilt the thrill. As Gustav found out more and more about her, he was starting to realize that Miss Amy was a weirdo, but who was he to judge? His whole life had been nothing short of cringe. In a few minutes, they arrived in front of a large, 700-story building at the southwest of the city. This building was the tallest in this particular part of the city. It looked like a business building because a lot of people could be seen going in and out of the building. Four big muscular men stood at the entrance. Miss Amy parked by the side. She and Gustav walked towards the entrance. The men bowed towards Miss Amy when they spotted her walking up the stairs with Gustav. Gustav was familiar with this environment because he had been coming here with Miss Amy for the past month. Gammy Dojo occupied the top 3 floors of this building. Miss Amy had been bringing him here for training. "Welcome, young miss," the men spoke at the same time. Miss Amy nodded softly and handed a cube-like medal towards one of the bulky men. The man received it and walked towards Miss Amy's hoverbike while Gustav and Miss Amy walked into the building. Chapter 29. The interior of the building was well designed. There were counters on the north and east sides of the ground floor. Female receptionists could be seen at the counters. The ceiling was designed with blue and margaret-colored tile that blended well together. Small circular white glows were lined up in rows across the ceiling. A holographic projection of a female in a green business suit was placed in the middle. The female face beamed with smiles as she welcomed the arrival of people into the building. Miss Amy and Gustav headed towards the corridor at the northeast corner of the first floor. They walked through it before arriving at the elevators. The transparent doors slid open, and both of them walked in along with 3 other people. Just when the doors were about to close up, a man clad in a red and black striped jacket used his hands to stop it from closing up. The man stared at Miss Amy with a smile as he walked into the elevator. He was sporting shoulder-length black hair and putting on a pair of yellow sunglasses. He had a slightly large build and a tough look, but the way he smiled at Miss Amy was creepy. "Ha! Amy, what a pleasure to see you didn't back down to challenge." He had a wide grin on his face as he pushed the people standing in front to the side with his body. They all glared at him, but didn't have the guts to say anything. He walked towards Miss Amy, who didn't even bother to spare him another glance after seeing who it was. Shove. He used his body to shove Gustav towards the side so he could stand in their midst. Gustav was now standing close to the transparent glass walls on the left side. After forcefully putting himself in their midst, the man turned to the side to stare at Gustav with a threatening look. "Brat, prepare to lose today," he said to Gustav before turning back to face Miss Amy on the left. "When he loses, remember our bargain." He grinned as he moved his face close to Miss Amy's cheek. Miss Amy, who didn't speak a word since his entry, finally muttered something as her nose twitched. Such foul breath. The man's face twisted upon hearing that, but before he could retort, Miss Amy walked towards the front. "Let's go, Gustav, we're going to use the other one," she said and tapped on a button which caused the elevator to open up. Gustav nodded and walked towards the glass doors. "He can't win," the man in sunglasses shouted out as they walked out of the elevator. "This foul breath will be what your lips will taste soon," the man's sunglasses stated with a confident look. "We shall see about that." Miss Amy didn't even bother turning around as she spoke. She and Gustav left the elevator to enter the other one beside it. The man in the other elevator gritted his teeth with annoyance. "That brat. I will make sure he is dealt with so I don't see him around you anymore," he spat as the elevator glowed up. A circular blue light descended from above and surrounded them. In a blink of an eye, everyone disappeared. The elevators within these buildings weren't ordinary. They were teleportation elevators that would beam them to their desired floor. Anything that had to do with spatial travel was very expensive, that even a lot of wealthy people couldn't afford it. This proved just how high-class the building was, even though the teleportation elevator was not comparable to teleportation circles. Gustav and Miss Amy entered into the next one. They didn't speak about what happened a minute ago because it was nothing new to them. Gustav reminisced about the last month when he arrived in Miss Amy's office just as she demanded. "You are the reason for Hung Joe and Ben's condition, aren't you? Also, you killed Paul, didn't you?" Gustav's eyes widened in fear after hearing her questions upon his arrival. His palms started sweating as he racked his brain for excuses. "Don't worry, there's no cause for alarm. I already knew," she stated with her usual indifferent look. Besides, they deserved the punishment they received. You stood up for yourself, which is a right everyone should possess, but this world is full of discrimination. Without power, you will always be at the bottom of the food chain. Oppression, depression," Miss Amy said with a disappointed look. "Miss Amy, even with that, I still committed a crime. Why would you help me?" Gustav questioned with a baffled look. "Because you finally stood up. You fought back. If you had left them to keep doing to you as they pleased, I would never have stretched forth my hand to assist you. I hate weak-minded people. Being physically weak is understandable, but being mentally weak means you can never be truly powerful. Miss Amy's words kept ringing in his ear, mind, and heart. You took the first step to become powerful. I don't know what luck you have received recently that could have helped you to achieve what you did, but it's all right for you to keep it a secret. After all, everyone has a secret or two. Gustav finally calmed down after hearing Miss Amy's explanation and point of view. I will train you and make sure you learn how to use your abilities properly, Miss Amy concluded with that. Miss Amy, I understand now and I'm filled with gratitude, but I also understand that nothing comes for free. What would you want in return? Gustav questioned with a slightly tensed look. He had read enough books to understand the concept of the world. Oh, it seems you are really hell-bent on repaying me. What I want in return, Miss Amy smiled as she spoke. Gustav's heart rate increased on seeing her smile. Miss Amy has never smiled before. I hope she doesn't plan to turn me into her slave. When the time is right, I will ask. For now, nothing comes to mind, Miss Amy replied as her facial expression went back to normal. Huh. Gustav was surprised at this reply, but he decided to keep an open mind. Even if she wants me to become her slave or make an unreasonable request later, I will become powerful enough to stop that from happening. Gustav was grateful for her help, but he also didn't want to be manipulated. Since that day, Miss Amy had been training Gustav. His usage of strength, speed, and fight skills had improved during the past month. Of course, he didn't let her know that he had other bloodlines within him. He only revealed that his genetic transformation bloodline could increase in grade, which shocked Miss Amy greatly. She told him never to reveal it to anyone, if not he'd be turned into a lab rat. Gustav figured he shouldn't have mentioned it after seeing her reaction, but Miss Amy had done enough for him to give her the benefit of the doubt. When Miss Amy first brought him to Gammy Dojo, they ran into the man they just met at the elevator a while ago. John Brown. He was a well-known, powerful mixed blood trainer around here. He was also one of Miss Amy's suitors. According to Miss Amy, he had been bugging her like a fly to go out with him for some time. She always turned him down. When he saw Miss Amy bringing Gustav, he approached them again and found out that Gustav was Miss Amy's student. When he questioned Gustav about his bloodline grade, he was shocked that Gustav was an F-grade mixed blood. He never expected Miss Amy to personally train an F-grade mixed blood. Since then, he had been trying to separate Miss Amy from Gustav. He hated seeing Gustav move around with her and also act casual with her. This man happened to also have a female student that he trained in the dojo. He issued a challenge to Miss Amy 2 weeks ago that both students would duel one another. He proposed that if his student won, Miss Amy would get rid of Gustav and go on a date with her. Miss Amy agreed after bringing forth her proposal. When Gustav wins, don't ever come closer than 10 feet around me. The kind of confidence she had in Gustav was really surprising. This was why Gustav made sure he channeled his bloodline through the 4th point today. He also wasn't fond of John Brown and his female student. Since they both treated him with contempt, he would like nothing more than to slap both their faces today by winning the duel. Gustav and Miss Amy arrived at the 3rd to the last floor, which was where the teleportation elevator could take them to. There were only 2 more floors above this one. To go up, a person would have to climb actual stairs, because there was no elevator to get to the last floor. Hiya, 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 hiya. Upon exiting the elevator, these were the sounds that entered into their eardrums. It was like they had arrived at a different place entirely. Chapter 30. A patch of grasses and flowers could be seen planted in the environment. The ceiling was constructed in such a way that a person would think they were outside the building. The ceiling looked like the blue skies. Small bungalow-like buildings made of wood could be seen around. These bungalow houses had white sliding doors with black lines plastered on them, forming rows and columns. This place was larger than 10 stadiums joined together, so it was able to house other structures. Nevertheless, it was surprising to see that structures like this could be built in a business building. The environment gave off an ancient vibe to Gustav. When he first arrived here, he was very shocked, but he also found it to his liking. Even though it looked ancient, there were still some technological types of equipment put in place. There was a bloodline grading device standing at a corner. There was also a power output device and some other pieces of equipment out in the open. The sounds that they heard when they arrived here were coming from the small bungalow structures constructed with wood. This place was Gami Dojo, a prestigious place for training mixed bloods in the city. It was also very expensive. Teachers usually rented one of the buildings to teach their students here extra time. Teachers who did this also charged the parents of the kids, but Miss Amy paid for everything herself. Most of the kids that come here were also spoilt brats, so Gustav had never associated with them since he started coming here. The environment was conducive for teaching mixed bloods and enabling them to learn faster. Equipments, materials, and other different things were provided here to also help the students train well. Master mixed blood trainers existed within this building. Miss Amy and Gustav headed towards the stairs. They always had their sessions on the last floor, so that was where they were headed. Anytime a person saw Miss Amy, they would greet her by saying, "Good day, young miss." This sounded like a casual greeting, but they would also give a standing bow while greeting. This made Gustav more suspicious of Miss Amy's background, which she never revealed to him. He figured she must have been coming here for a long time. After climbing the stairs for a few minutes, they arrived at the top floor. Unlike the second and third to the last floors, this floor wasn't crowded or packed with many of those bungalow buildings. They were only about 10 in number, and the atmosphere gave off a soothing feeling. The 3 floors were built using some energy crystals. The energy crystals helped mixed bloods in meditation, especially to channel their bloodline faster. The higher the floor, the better the service. Miss Amy and Gustav went towards the dojo on the east side. The design was pretty luxurious, and beautiful flowers could be seen surrounding it. They slid the doors to the side and walked in. The interior was just like how a dojo would look, but it was mixed with both modern and ancient types of equipment. It had a weapon rack at the side where katanas, sabers, and some combination of a sword and gun could be seen. The floors looked wooden, but the truth is, they are harder than titanium, yet still soft to the feet. Miss Amy went into the changing room. Gustav walked up to the front where some weights could be seen. There were blue-colored steel weightlifting plates placed on both sides of the rods, also some other steel weightlifting plates stacked upon each other by the side. They were in different sizes, but Gustav moved closer to one carrying about 6 weight plates on both sides. Gustav held his chin as he thought of something. "I haven't completed today's task," Gustav muttered and proceeded to squat. He placed his right hand on the metallic rod holding the weight plates and lifted it. Gustav lifted it with ease, carrying it above his head. The last time he came here, he couldn't lift this weight because it weighed more than 1,000 kilograms. He opened the system interface as he did this to check his progress. Quests. Daily today's task, 1/3. Travel 120 kilometers. Status. 116/120 km. Climb to a height of 806 meters. Status. 806/806 m. Carry a total of 2,450 kilograms. Status. 1,200/2,450 kg. Gustav purposely didn't lift anything today, just so he could figure out how much this weighed so he could use it to calculate his current strength. 1,200 kilograms. I don't feel sore, but also I can tell that if I add more plates to this, it would only struggle to lift it after some time. Gustav lowered it. Let me see how fluid I can be with this. Instead of lifting it normally, Gustav held it like a baseball bat. The only difference was, he was still holding it with one hand. Swing, 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 swing. He swung the weight several times casually. After doing it more than 10 times, he stopped. I can probably go 50 more times before my stamina runs out. Gustav's reason for doing this was to properly gauge his current level of strength. Daily task completed, 2/3, carry a total of 2,450 kilograms. As he was dropping the weight back to the ground, Miss Amy walked out of the changing room. She was dressed in a butter color and red yukata. Butter color for the top and red for the bottom reaching her feet. Her aloof expression added a certain kind of charm to her current look. Also, her cleavage was partly exposed, proving that Miss Amy wasn't small in any way. She stared at Gustav dropping the weight. "Oh, you can lift that now? Did you already channel your bloodline through the 4th point?" Miss Amy figured it out immediately. Gustav nodded in affirmation. "That's quite a big leap in strength," Miss Amy stated with a contemplative gaze. I doubt there's a Zulu-ranked mixed blood that could easily lift that without having a kind of strength-related bloodline, Miss Amy added. I'll take that as a compliment, Miss Amy. Gustav smiled as he replied. Strength isn't everything, though. Always remember a well-skilled mixed blood can easily deal with a mixed blood who doesn't know how to use their strength properly, Miss Amy stated before turning around. Do not fear the man who has practiced 1,000 techniques only once. Fear the man who has practiced one technique 1,000 times. Miss Amy's method of complimenting me is really weird, Gustav sighed after hearing Miss Amy's speech even though he knew it was right. I have been training you on your areas of weakness, highly predictable attacks and movements, leaving too many openings after completing an attack. If you want my compliment, let me see the fruits of your training today. Go get dressed, Miss Amy said as she walked towards the door. Gustav nodded and walked to the dressing room. In about 2 minutes he came out wearing the same clothes as Miss Amy. The both of them walked towards the west side of the floor where a large stage that was half the size of a basketball pitch could be seen. Some people stood around the stage area, mostly young people who seemed to be around Gustav's age. 2 buff men wearing green yukatas also stood at the right. A man and a young female stood on the stage. He and the female were dressed in a yellow and red striped yukata. The female was sporting green back-length hair. She was a 53 beauty, but her gaze was laced with pride. The man started smiling once he saw Miss Amy approaching. This was the same man that they met at the first elevator, John Brown. The female was his student, Aurora Bright. Dash, is that him? Dash, he looks pretty weak to me. Dash, I heard he's F grade, so this duel will be finished in no time. The voices of other students within the vicinity drifted into the ears of Gustav as he walked towards the stage with Miss Amy. His look was indifferent, almost like he didn't hear them speak. They arrived before the stage and walked up. Oh, good thing you didn't run, but you can still accept that date proposal before Aurora puts him in the hospital. John Brown smiled sheepishly as he spoke. Chapter 31. Please read the author's note below. I wish to correct some misunderstanding. We don't have time to waste here, so let's get to the point. Samzuma, Bola, my student is ready for the duel. Miss Amy turned to the 2 men clad in green yukuta while speaking. All right, we have heard the terms of the duel, and we will make sure that whoever fails between the students keeps up their end of the bargain. The man on the left with a bald head spoke. He was very slim, but he had a deep voice. According to the terms, injuries are allowed. The teacher is meant to take care of the medical condition of their student. If they end up receiving any form of injury, also no form of bullying shall be tolerated by a teacher once their student losses. The other Go-see spoke. He had white hair and looked fairly tanned with a stout body. Both teachers nodded in understanding. Aurora, go easy on him. He's just an F grade after all. Ha ha ha, John Brown ridiculed before turning around to leave the stage. Gustav, you know what to do, Miss Amy said with a low voice before leaving the stage. Gustav and Aurora, who were several feet away from one another, exchanged glances. Humph, trash that doesn't know his place. I will send you to the hospital today, the female said before standing in a battle pose. Gustav didn't even bother replying to her remark. He stood in position and stared at her. A female once crushed me. Never again. Gustav squinted his eyes as he stared at her. Let the duel begin. Immediately those words were uttered from the side. Gustav saw Aurora's body suddenly glow up. Sweeve. In a split second, blue patterns that formed arrows appeared all over the visible part of her body. She stretched out her right hand. Whoosh. Small winds started gathering around it. The small swirling winds were transforming into water. Aurora was turning the air into water and the water into a long blade, but before she could complete it, she saw Gustav suddenly dash forward. He's fast, she thought in her mind as she speedily transformed the water into a 2-foot blade and swung it towards the incoming Gustav. Slash. Gustav, who dashed out the moment Aurora started conjuring her attack, saw the blade swinging towards his neck from the left. Gustav, who happened to be faster than Aurora, pushed out his right palm towards Aurora's wrist, which was still swinging towards him. Pa. Gustav's palm slammed into her wrist, changing the course of the attack, but he didn't stop there. Immediately Aurora lost her balance after her hand was slapped away. Gustav rotated and swung his left elbow towards her face. She was extremely shocked to see Gustav's elbow headed towards her face after he countered her attack. How is he so fast? She wondered because she could already tell that Gustav was faster than she was from his movements. She was still able to react on time by raising her left arm in front of her face. Bam! Gustav's elbow collided with her arm. Ugh! She exclaimed in pain as the force sent her sliding backward by 7 feet. SSHHHSSS. Her arm was still held up after the force pushed her back, but it was trembling slightly. Such insane physical strength. How is this possible when he hasn't even activated his bloodline? Isn't he just an F rank? She stared at Gustav with a wary and disbelieving expression as she tried sending more power into her numb left arm. Dash, what is wrong with Aurora? Dash, she just got thrown off by a common F rank. Dash, so lousy she should be winning in an instant. What's she doing standing around? The other young-looking students here chatted among themselves after seeing the first exchange. There were about 16 students who looked to be around Gustav's age gathered here. Even John Brown had a baffled expression on his face. Come on, didn't you say you will send me to the hospital? What are you waiting for? I'm right here, Gustav questioned with a ridiculing expression while staring at her. Don't get cocky. Aurora shouted this out and proceeded to wave her right arm forward. As she swung out the blade made of water towards Gustav, a wave of water was shot out in an arc towards him. Swerve. Gustav dodged to the right, causing the attack to pass by his left side. Aurora didn't stop there. She kept swinging the water blade severally, causing more water attacks to appear out of thin air while flying towards Gustav. Swerve. 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 Even though the speed of the attacks was almost twice as fast as Earth's former fastest man, Gustav was still able to dodge every one of them. The speed of each swing was fiercer than the former, and Gustav knew he couldn't keep dodging for long without using a speed-related skill, so he started using footwork to slowly move forward as he dodged the attacks. Aurora was currently gritting her teeth in frustration after noticing that her attacks didn't connect, even after all the strength she put into it. Bam! Bam! 2 of her water attacks slammed into the stage several feet behind Gustav. Even with the toughness of the stage, a 3 inches deep line was cut across it. The patterns on Aurora's body suddenly glowed brighter again as the blade in her hand grew to a length of over 15 feet long. It turned into a large scythe. Gustav could already sense that this attack was a much more powerful attack than before, but due to the size he felt she wouldn't be able to swing it as fast. This was his opportunity to close in the gap. Gustav ran forward just as she swung the scythe made of water towards his left side. To his surprise, the movement of her attack was faster than his movement. Before Gustav could close in the gap between them, the scythe had already arrived before him. KRYYSHH. A bone-popping sound rang out as an unimaginable scene played out in front of them. Gustav's body suddenly bent towards the front. His knees allowed him to bend in such a way that his body resembled a pistol that was standing on the ground. Due to this action, he was able to dodge the swing without activating dash. His knee could be seen bending at an unbelievable angle that made his body look like a pistol. The hinge joint could be seen popping from underneath the skin behind his knee. Dash, that looks disgusting. Dash, what in the world? Dash, is that the ability of his bloodline? They were shocked to see the way Gustav was bent. What in the world is that? Aurora was also having a shocked look as the scythe started reducing in size. KRYYSHH. Gustav stood up back as his legs returned to normal. Gustav had just activated joint movement, causing his knee joint to reverse its functions. At that moment, his ability to or kneel was reversed. Instead of his leg being able to bend towards his butt, it was capable of bending towards in the other direction. He used the force from his dash coupled with that to dodge the attack. Immediately, Gustav's body went back to normal. Aurora was already sending out another attack towards him. Chapter 32. The attack passed under him, bringing about small winds that caused his yukata to blow up slightly. Gustav somersaulted in the air as he was landing. His left leg was heading for Aurora's body. Suddenly, streams of water appeared out of thin air as he was close to making contact with her. The streams of water were like tentacles. They were about 12 of them that shot out at the same time. They all traveled towards Gustav's body that was still dropping towards the ground. 3 each were headed for his right and left arm, while the remaining 6 headed for his right and left legs respectively. Everyone felt it would be impossible for him to dodge this attack since he was still in midair, and the tentacles were close to making contact. To their surprise again, Gustav suddenly retracted every one of his limbs and tightened them to his body while folding himself in midair. He was practically curled up in a ball-like format as the tentacles passed by his sides, missing him by a hair length. Using this method not only enabled Gustav to dodge the attack, but also made him descend faster than the water tentacles could turn back around to attack him again. Blam! Gustav landed back on the stage in a squatting format. Aurora's eyes widened as she quickly called back the tentacles to attack Gustav. Immediately Gustav landed, he wasted no time in swinging out his arm towards Aurora's chest. Swish! His attack was extremely faster than she could call back the tentacles, but just as Gustav's hand was close to hitting her chest, she's a female. It would be wrong to touch her there. Instead, Illinois. In less than a millisecond, he concluded and changed the trajectory of his palm. Aurora, who had already conjured a small barrier of water in front of her chest, was shocked to see Gustav's palm swing upwards. Pa! A loud slap resounded in the environment as Gustav's hand collided with Aurora's left cheek. This is more like it, Gustav said in his mind with a sadistic grin as his palm pushed against Aurora's cheek. He could feel some of her teeth forcefully removing from her gum. The heaviness of the slap caused Aurora's cheek to ripple as her entire body was lifted off the ground in a rotating motion. Ugh. Such intense strangith. I lo esti? These were the thoughts that drifted into her mind as her body was currently falling to the stage, with her legs up and her head traveling down. The left side of her face had 5 bloody fingers imprinted on it. Bang! Her head slammed heavily onto the stage, and she felt her vision fading. A speck of blood coated her head area on the stage. Gasp! Aurora! John Brown ran from his position with a panicky look towards Aurora, who was lying on the stage with a bloodied face and swollen head. How is this possible? An F grade winning a B grade mixed blood. Is he truly an F grade? Chatters could be heard coming from the students surrounding the stage as they stared at Gustav in disbelief. The winner has been decided. Samzuma spoke with an authoritative voice. This duel is officially over. Teacher Amy's student has won. He added with a voice of authority. John Brown, who was currently squatting in front of Aurora, glared at Gustav with a look of hate. He brought out an orange pill and placed it in her mouth. Aurora, who had a red face earlier on, slowly started to regain her former look. Her swollen head that slammed onto the stage started to reduce. The bloodiness on her cheek slowly started to return to its normal color. She could feel her teeth that were uprooted from her gum due to the intense slap slowly grow out once again. In a few seconds, she was healed completely. She opened her eyes properly as she recalled everything that happened a while ago. She was feeling an intense amount of humiliation right now. There's no way I could lose to trash like you. You're just an F grade. She shouted out with a look of hate as she glared at Gustav, who was currently standing on the stage. Pitiful. Gustav uttered these words before turning around to leave the stage. You low-life, fight me again. She shouted out as she stood up and ran towards Gustav. Teacher Brown, control your student. The man with the bald head spoke. John Brown quickly held her back before she could move further than 3 feet. You're just asking for another round of humiliation. Frankly, you're not worth my time since I can't do that. Gustav's voice streamed into her ears, filling her with intense frustration, but John Brown held her back firmly. If only I could steal a B-grade bloodline. Maybe I would have indulged you a little bit more, Gustav sighed in his mind as he walked off the stage. Now, in accordance to the terms before this duel commenced, Teacher John is not meant to come closer than 10 feet to Teacher Amy. Failure to hold up to the end of this bargain will result in a permanent ban from entering Gami Dojo. Bola spoke with an authoritative look. How could this be? It's a shame to high-graded mixed blood toy. The dissatisfied voices of the students could be heard around the stage. You did well. Miss Amy said with a smile as Gustav walked towards her. Gustav smiled back and stood in front of her. Such level of strength from a first-step Zulu ranked is unheard of. Even Miss Amy was shocked. She had expected Gustav to win, but this was far too easier than she expected. Looks like the MBO entrance test will have a monster participating, Miss Amy thought as she stared at Gustav. Miss Amy, can we leave now? Gustav questioned after noticing that Miss Amy didn't say anything else after speaking the first time. Yes, let's go. She turned around while Gustav moved to her right side. Wait, one of the students shouted out. Miss Amy and Gustav turned around to see who spoke. It was a young male sporting green hair with a slim and slightly tall figure. Supervisor Samsuna. Supervisor Bola, please allow me to take back our pride as B-grade mixed bloods. The male spoke before shouting out, Gustav, I challenge you to a duel. Oh my. Masuba can't seem to hold back. Gustav's humiliation is certain, now that Masuba has challenged him. Trashy F-grade needs to be put in their place. The chatters of the students could be heard again. Masuba, a duel cannot happen without agreement from both sides. Samsuna spoke. Gustav, accept my challenge if you dare. Masuba shouted out after hearing the words of Samsuna. Gustav stared at him for a little while before turning around once again. I refuse, Gustav said, and proceeded to keep walking away with Miss Amy. Everyone was dumbstruck. They had expected Gustav to agree to it immediately since boys of their ages tend to get provoked easily. You coward! Do you not have any shame? Accept my challenge. Masuba shouted out to Gustav, who was walking away with Miss Amy. Chapter 33. Trying to use such unintelligible means to provoke me won't work since, not only would I easily defeat you, I would also get nothing out of it. I have better things to do with my time, Gustav stated from ahead, without even turning his back to look. Masuba gritted his teeth in annoyance after hearing that. What if you could get something out of it? Can we make a wager? Masuba shouted out. This time Gustav finally paused his footsteps. Although I can't steal his bloodline, there are things I still need and he can provide them, Gustav smiled as he turned around. A wager sounds good to me, Gustav answered and started walking towards them once again. After a few minutes, Gustav and Masuba stood opposite one another on the stage. Since I don't want to waste time, I might as well end this as soon as possible, Gustav thought internally as he waited for Supervisor Samsuna to give the go-ahead for the duel to start. Masuba stared at Gustav with a wary look. After the fight earlier, he could tell that Gustav wasn't one to be trifled with yet. He couldn't bear the thought of an F-grade winning against a B-grade. He must have a high amount of strength. If that's the case, I shall not let him get close to me, Masuba analyzed and came to a quick conclusion after replaying the last duel in his mind. What he didn't know was Gustav wasn't putting everything into winning because he decided not to use any speed-related skill earlier. Which is the best to use in this situation? Dash is slower than sprint, but sprint takes more energy points. Only if I don't end the duel on time, so sprint it is. Gustav came to this conclusion immediately. Supervisor Bola decided to speak. Let the duel begin. Sprint activate. Gustav called out in his mind. Sprint has been activated. Host speed will be multiplied by 2. 20 energy points will be expended for every second sprint is activated. 20 EP. Immediately Gustav activated it, everything slowed down around him, including Masuba that was currently trying to conjure an attack with his abilities. Gustav smiled and dashed forward. Swoosh. In an instant, Gustav had closed in the gap between them and arrived in front of Masuba while throwing out his fist. You're not a female, so I have no qualms with hitting you on the chest, Gustav thought as his arm traveled with intense force towards Masuba's chest. Masuba only saw a blurry figure appear before him with an outstretched fist. He had not even conjured his attack. The duel only started a second ago, and yet he could only watch as the fist made contact with his chest. Bang! Gustav's fist collided with Masuba's chest, causing a loud bone-cracking sound to ring out. Blarg! Masuba vomited out a trail of blood as his body traveled in midair with his back arched out due to the force of the punch. How do ES and F-grade have T's musich stringth? This was Masuba's thought process before landing on his back just a few centimeters outside the stage area in front. Plop. Masuba's eyes rolled to the back as he fell unconscious. He kept vomiting out blood even after fainting. Deactivate sprint. Gustav called out in his mind. Sprint has been deactivated. Silence. There was total silence as everyone stared at the stage area with their jaws hanging loosely from their mouths. What they had just witnessed was something unbelievable. Something that no one would believe if they didn't see it with their very own eyes. An F-grade defeated 2 B-grade mixed bloods in less than 30 minutes. The second mixed blood did not even last for up to a second before the battle ended in his loss. Everyone couldn't process their thoughts. Even Miss Amy had a shocked look on her usually expressionless face. That outburst of speed is not something a Zulu ranked should not be able to achieve. Miss Amy stared at Gustav with a look of suspicion. Gustav stood on the stage with a look of contemplation. I haven't used it before, but it is very satisfying. Except for the amount of energy it consumes, Gustav thought. Originally, his punch wouldn't send a Zulu-ranked mixed blood flying more than 3 to 7 feet away, but after coupling it with his speed multiplied by 2, the punch packed twice as much force. Masuba ribs and sternum were currently fractured due to the punch. Gustav wins this duel. After many seconds had passed, Supervisor Bola finally broke the silence. Everyone came out of their reverie, but still stared at Gustav with a look of astonishment. Dash, how did he manage to defeat Masuba in a single second? Dash, maybe he's a step 4 Zulu ranked in disguise? Dash, how is this possible when he's just F-grade? The students could not wrap their heads around what had just happened. Aurora had widened eyes as she watched Gustav walk down the stage. Doesn't this mean he was holding back when he fought me? It was hard to believe for everyone, but they had no choice since they had seen it happen before their very eyes. Supervisor Samsuna walked towards Masuba that was on the ground and raised his head before putting an orange pill in his mouth. Masuba, who had a pale face earlier, began to heal up back little by little. Mixed bloods could have battles like this because they were tenacious enough to survive even though they received a fatal injury. If this was a normal person, Gustav's one punch would have ended their life in an instant. Masuba slowly opened his eyes after his bones were put back in place and his broken ribs joined together. Ugh! He blurted out with pain after another broken bone got joined together again. After a few more seconds, he stood up. Remember our wager. Now hand it over. Gustav shouted out from the other end of the stage. Masuba had a dejected look as he took out a small blue cube and walked towards Gustav. Here, he handed the cube over to Gustav. Gustav collected it with a smirk on his face. Your donation is appreciated, Gustav said after collecting the cube. He turned around to leave with Miss Amy. Hey, Masuba called out to Gustav with a hesitant look. Gustav paused in his steps as he turned his head to the side to stare at Masuba. Can we put everything behind us and become friends? Masuba proposed. Gasp. The rest of the students gasped in surprise, even though they understood what Masuba was aiming at. Friends? Gustav questioned with a confused look. Yes, friends. My father is chief of... Before Masuba could complete his statement, Gustav cut him short. You want to be friends with an F-grade trash? Gustav questioned him with a ridiculing look. No, you're not trash, but yes, I want to be friends with you, Masuba stuttered while answering the question. No thanks, trash doesn't want to be friends with you. Gustav turned him down and immediately turned around to continue walking. Everyone was surprised once again. Did he just turn Masuba down again? Everyone knew how Masuba's father was the chief of police in Plankton City. There was no one who wouldn't want to befriend him, yet he was turned down by an F-grade. Masuba had a look of humiliation as he watched Gustav leave with Miss Amy. Friends? Ha ha ha, who needs that? This was Gustav's thought process as he walked towards their training room alongside Miss Amy. He stared at the blue cube in his hands with looks of greed visible all over his face. Gustav, what do you plan to do with such an amount of money? Miss Amy questioned. In the duel earlier, the wager was 50,000 rad would be given to Gustav by Masuba if he won, while if he lost, Masuba demanded that Gustav bowed to him whenever they crossed paths. Miss Amy wants some money, maybe? Gustav said with a playful tone. You cheeky little brat, you're becoming arrogant after winning, eh? Miss Amy said, and proceeded to knock Gustav's head. Ouch! Gustav held his head as he exclaimed in pain. It's all right if you don't want to say, Miss Amy added with a look of understanding. I plan to be independent, Gustav stated after a few seconds of silence. Chapter 34. It's all right if you don't want to say, Miss Amy added with a look of understanding. I plan to be independent, Gustav stated after a few seconds of silence. Miss Amy turned to the side to stare at him. Independence? She questioned. Yes, Miss Amy, I don't want to keep staying in a place where I'm not wanted, Gustav replied. Miss Amy had a contemplative look on her face after hearing Gustav's reply. So where do you plan on going? Miss Amy asked. I've made my research, and now that I won this duel, I have enough money to rent an apartment, Gustav answered with a look of anticipation. That's not a bad idea since you're already of legal age, but it might also be a waste to rent an apartment right now, Miss Amy said as they came to a pause in front of their dojo. In this time and age, the legal age for humans, Slarkovs, and mixed bloods was 16 years. At 16 years, a person would be considered to be an adult, and right now Gustav was already 17. What do you mean, Miss Amy? Gustav questioned with a confused look. In the next 4 months, the MBO entrance test will be holding. If you can pass and get picked to enter the MBO training camp, you won't require accommodation or feeding since the government will provide this for you, Miss Amy explained. She could understand where Gustav was coming from with his decision, but she felt it might be a waste for him to rent an apartment, only to leave it after 4 months. Rents were expensive around here and mostly only worked with annual payments. You should be saving up for other things instead, like supplies you may need during your days at the MBO camp. I can tell you that it won't be easy to survive there without having supplies that differ from military provisions, Miss Amy said with a slightly worried look. Miss Amy sounds sure of what she's saying. If that's the case, I will just have to receive more compensations, Gustav thought. Thank you, Miss Amy, but it would be better if I just move out now. About the issue of saving, I plan to do that by making even more money. Gustav bowed slightly to Miss Amy with a smile. All right, just make sure you plan well enough, because I can tell you that having only power might not be enough. Wealth is also an attribute, Miss Amy added before climbing up the 3 stairs positioned in front of their dojo. She suddenly paused and turned around to stare at Gustav. Since you won the challenge today, you and I will go on that date instead, Miss Amy stated and turned back around to walk in. Date? Gustav had a confused look on his face after hearing that. Come in and change back into your casual outfit, Miss Amy shouted from inside the dojo. Gustav was still confused by Miss Amy's sudden statement, but still proceeded to walk into the dojo. 20 minutes later, Miss Amy and Gustav were sitting inside a large restaurant. A ton of food was placed on the table in front of them. Beef turkey, mutated gigantic prawns, fried tiger fish, black rice, fried crabs on a stick, etc. The table was packed with exotic foods of different kinds. Gustav's eyes shone excitement, and he gulped down saliva while staring at the feast before them. Who knew Miss Amy was also a foodie? Gustav was surprised after Miss Amy ordered all these. They were currently in a well-known restaurant on the 634th floor of the building. Miss Amy decided to take Gustav out on a treat to reward him for his performance today. She reckoned that since she would have to go on a date with John Brown had Gustav lost, then she should give that reward to Gustav instead since he won. This was supposed to be a date. Instead, it was more like a food treat. Gustav was the first to order when they arrived at the restaurant. Miss Amy had told him at that time not to be modest and order whatever he wished, but still, he decided not to order much. He was surprised when he saw the amount of food Miss Amy ordered. The entire table was stacked with different types of dishes right now. The people on other tables were staring at them with a weird look, but both of them were not bothered in the slightest. The restaurant was a lavish one. It was obvious from the internal designs. The tables and seats were so dark, shiny, and smooth that it could be mistaken for a mirror from the visible reflections on their surfaces. The entire floor was tiled with a type of technological building material that shone clouds. Walking on the floors made it look like you were walking on the clouds. The air smelled so yummy that you could taste it. What are you waiting for? An invitation? Miss Amy, who was currently holding onto a red prawn, called out to Gustav after noticing that he hadn't started eating. Diggin' already, Miss Amy added before opening her mouth and stuffing a body part of the prawn into her mouth. Gustav smiled as he was only thinking about which dish to try out first. Let's go with the mutated prawns first, Gustav thought, and proceeded to grab onto red prawn on the table. He could tell that the prawn was already dipped in hot sauce, which was why it was entirely red. There were about 5 of them on the table, and each one was thrice the size of a palm. Gustav broke one of them into 2 halves and quickly shoved it into his mouth. Half of it was still larger than a human palm. Yet Gustav was able to put the entire thing in his mouth. His cheeks bloated up as he smiled in delight. It's delicious. Due to his mouth being full, he couldn't speak properly. Crunch, crunch, crunch. As Gustav chewed on the mutated prawn, there was a mixture of flavors that he could detect. The salt at first crunch tasted a bit strong, but after that, he could detect spices mixed in, a bit peppery with a tone of chicken-like flavor, mixed with small juicy tastes like cranberry and flowery lavender-like taste. Sea smell was also present, giving off an amazing feel. Everything came together to create a pleasant kind of taste in his mouth that was both sharp and mild. Gustav wasted no time in grabbing the second half before downing it in one go. Gustav's hands and mouth didn't stop moving until there was nothing left on the table. In a few minutes, everything had been downed by him and Miss Amy. Gustav rested his back on the chair after the feast and sighed in relief. It seems I'm going to be pregnant for a while, Gustav thought while staring at his tummy that was bloated. He looked up to stare at Miss Amy, who also had a look of satisfaction. Gustav stared at Miss Amy's tummy region and was shocked. Where did all that food go? He could see that there wasn't a bump. Not even the slightest sign could be seen that she just had a huge feast. He calculated in his mind that Miss Amy ate at least 60% of the food on the table. Who knew Miss Amy was such a monster? Seeing the way her tummy was as flat as ever, he couldn't imagine having a food competition with Miss Amy. By the way, Gustav, why didn't you accept Masuba's friendship? Miss Amy decided to ask this as it had been bugging her for a while. Gustav sat up upon hearing that and stared at nothing for a few seconds before answering. Miss Amy, at this point in my life, I have decided not to accept friendships that will be nothing but fake. That Masuba was one of them who called me trash, but after beating his ass, he decided to make friends. I would never be able to trust people like that to have my back when I'm in a vulnerable state. What happens if one day I'm unable to use my strength or become trash again? Would someone like that remain my friend? If power is the only reason for the bond we share, then there might as well not be any bond in the first place. Since the friendship is going to be based on power, then it's fake, and I don't want it. I don't know if I'm going to be able to ever establish real bonds with people, but I will try to, and when I do, it won't be based on power or selfish interests. Gustav explained lengthily. Miss Amy stared at him for a few seconds before replying, I understand your point, but it's also idiotic to think that way. Gustav was surprised by Miss Amy's response. If she understands, then why does she still say it's idiotic? Gustav wondered. It's idiotic because you might not know when you need to use such people for specific purposes, Miss Amy stated. Chapter 35. Gustav was still staring at her with a dumbfounded look. I'm not asking you to be friends with them. You can just be some sort of accomplice or acquaintance to them, and use them when you find yourself in a sticky situation that power might not be able to solve. Sometimes connections are useful. Remember this, Miss Amy said, and proceeded to stand up. We're leaving? Gustav questioned after noticing Miss Amy's action. Do you want to order another round? Miss Amy questioned. No, I'm all right, Gustav replied as he stared at his tummy before proceeding to stand up. After Miss Amy settled the bill, and they left the restaurant and afterwards the large building, Miss Amy dropped Gustav at home with her hoverbike. The eventful day ended this way. Gustav woke up the next morning and opened the system interface. Host attributes, skills and abilities, bloodlines, quests, shop. He wasted no time before calling out host attributes. Host attributes, name, Gustav Oslov, level, 4 class, EXP, 260/9500 HP, 170/170 energy, 80/80 attributes, strength, 32 perception, 30 mental fortitude, 28 agility, 28 speed, 30 bravery, 28 intelligence, 31 charm, null attributes point, 36 ever, since when Gustav raised mental fortitude to be almost as high as the others, had been saving up attribute points for emergencies. Every week, he would only add 4 to each of the attributes while saving the rest. His other reason for saving up attributes points was so that when he unlocked charm, he would be able to raise it to reach the points of other attributes. Gustav didn't check the system interface the day before when he became a Zulu ranked. Now that he was checking it, he noticed that the stats for his strength didn't go up even though he had undergone a tremendous increase in strength. Does the system only record the stats it gives to me? It seems this is the case, Gustav pondered internally. If the system was to record the stats based on his increase in strength, it should be double what was there right now. I wonder what requirements I need to unlock charm. Gustav was starting to get worried after not being able to unlock charm for 2 months. He was thinking about the requirement. A part of him felt he would maybe have to pull a big one with a large audience. Another part of him felt maybe he would need to get a girlfriend or something. He knew the latter part was stupid thinking, but this has been bugging him for a while. He remembered when bravery was unlocked. It was also in front of a large audience, but charm wasn't unlocked along with it, so he was pretty confused, but he felt to unlock charm, the requirement might be something that won't let him remain low-key. Gustav had a slight headache thinking about it. Maybe he'll just ask Miss Amy what her definition of charm is. Gustav concluded internally and proceeded to open abilities. Skills and abilities, dash, level 3, sprint, level 2, regeneration, level 2, morph, level 2, joint movement, level 2, toxin immunity, level 2, recreation, level 2, bloodline acquisition, level 2, chopping, level 5, palm strike, level 3, frying, level 7. Gustav had a wry smile whenever he saw the cooking skills underneath. The most shameful aspect was, the cooking skills had higher levels than his fighting skills. Maybe I should just take Boss Danzo's offer and become his successor, Gustav said with a sigh. He had been going to the kitchen more often than using his fighting abilities, which was what caused the growth of his cooking skills to increase. The good side to it was when he found out that he could use some of the cooking skills in an actual fight. He tried using chop one time when he and Miss Amy were sparring, and it worked as a perfect counter to her attack at that moment. What Gustav felt he was lacking now was experience, and he was still trying to figure out how to garner more experience before the start MBO entrance test. He wanted to increase the level of bloodline acquisition, so he would be able to steal higher-graded bloodlines, but it felt he might have to steal a lot of lower-grade bloodlines before he would be able to level up to that extent, because he had realized that leveling up came with more usage of a specific skill or ability. Gustav stood up from his tub and went to prepare for school. In a few minutes, he was done. I have to look for an apartment today, Gustav muttered as he walked out of the house quietly. Gustav arrived at school in a few minutes of running and went to the school kitchen as usual. The way he worked now was 3 hours in the school kitchen before heading towards class for the day's activities. Even though he only needed to work 3 hours, he was still getting 5,000 rad every month. At this point, what no one knew was Gustav had over 250,000 rad. Although this wasn't a huge sum in the eyes of millionaires and the likes, Gustav was still considered pretty rich. He still remembered that his father earned around 20,000 every month from energy mining, while his mother earned around 15,000 from being a sub-assistant lab scientist. So he could be considered pretty rich even though he received the money from rich brats. The day pretty much ended uneventfully. It hadn't been revealed yet that Gustav was already a Zulu-ranked mixed blood. If not, it would have caused a huge uproar. It was well known that it is very hard for an F-grade mixed bloods, found it hard to reach the Zulu rank since that was the lowest grade for bloodlines. The grade of a bloodline determined how far a mixed blood would reach in the bloodline ranking. Everyone had seen Gustav as a mixed blood who would never get to the Zulu rank due to his bloodline grade being lower than F. Gustav left the school premises after closing hours. He was currently headed towards the northeast part of Plankton City. Miss Amy had given him today off for training, since he decided to go look for an apartment to stay. He was currently heading towards the edge of the city there since that was the cheapest place to rent a house according to his research. Gustav had enough money to use public transport, but he was still contemplating whether he should or not. After all, he was already used to trekking. After a brief moment of thinking, he decided to make use of public transport. He boarded a hover bus at the nearest park. The hover buses around here, just like the others, floated few inches above the ground, and the movement was very smooth. No bumpiness of any kind also. There were spatial rings positioned in different parts of the roads. This was only for vehicles to get to their destinations faster. A spatial ring was big enough to fit in 10 huge trucks at the same time, and it was always active on the roads. It was able to teleport bigger masses and farther than the teleportation circle for pedestrians. The only issue was, a person couldn't enter the spatial ring. If a normal person tried entering the spatial ring, their bodies would be ripped to shreds before they could arrive on the other side, which was why the teleportation circle was for individuals. The hover bus began its movement, and it only took about 5 minutes before it arrived at Gustav's destination. Gustav didn't even have enough time to enjoy the inside scenery of the bus or the sight of the beautiful female student sitting beside him. He never expected the journey to be this short. Immediately, Gustav got down. What appeared in his line of sight were small buildings of 30 stories and the likes. Unlike the main part of the city, this place was more like a town. Gustav walked towards a particular building on his right, which happened to be a coffee shop. He walked into the small coffee shop and arrived in front of a small table at the window side. A man in a green business suit was sitting there waiting for him. "Good day," Gustav greeted him. "Good day. Can I help you?" the man asked politely. "I am supposed to meet a certain Mr. Kalu here," Gustav replied. "That's me, and you are?" the man replied and also asked again. Gustav replied with his name. "Oh, Mr. Gustav, nice to meet you." The man stood up and reached out his hand to shake Gustav. Gustav returned the handshake with a slightly surprised expression. I had expected he would freak out upon finding out that it was a kid, Gustav thought, and proceeded to sit in front after the exchange of pleasantries. This man happened to be an agent Gustav contacted earlier on through Miss Amy. He was the one who would help Gustav get an apartment around here. Gustav had expected some kind of attitude when the agent met him, but he was surprised to meet such a polite person who didn't even flinch after finding out that he was meeting up with a kid. The both of them started discussions on the kind of apartment Gustav would like to rent. After Gustav mentioned his preferences, Mr. Kalu brought out a device that projected the looks of different apartments. Gustav only needed to touch the projection to zoom in on a particular apartment. After checking through several of them, Gustav finally made a choice. "I think I'd like this one," Gustav said while pointing at the apartment displayed on the projection. Chapter 36. After Gustav picked an apartment, the agent, Mr. Kalu, took Gustav to where it was located. It was only a few blocks away. This was the edge of the city, so Gustav could see the outline of a sparse forest behind this residential area with a well-structured road in the middle that led to the city borders. They arrived in front of a 7-story building situated in the middle of the 3rd Street. It was yellow and brown in color. It was well-structured and didn't seem too fancy, neither did it look poor. Although this area was very far from Echelon Academy, transportation made the long distance seem useless. Gustav would be able to get to school within 5 minutes after walking to the hover bus station. Mr. Kalu took Gustav to the 3rd apartment on the last floor. Each floor had about 7 apartments, but the last floor had only 4. This was because there was a big balcony up there that covered 1/3 of space. The apartment Gustav was about to rent was just beside the door that led to the balcony. The agent took him into the apartment and showed him how every room looked. The apartment had 2 rooms, with a kitchen and a living room that was big enough to house up to 50 people. It was really well spaced. Gustav walked from room to room, inspecting everywhere with a satisfied expression. Even though there was 1 extra room than he expected, he still wanted to go ahead and rent the place after finding out the price. 50,000 rad? Gustav asked Mr. Kalu. "Yes, Mr. Gustav. Is something wrong? We can bargain for it if you feel it's too expensive," Mr. Kalu proposed. "Oh, so the price can still go lower than this?" Gustav was pleasantly surprised, as he had been expecting it to be expensive than this. "Well, how about I pay 40,000? Gustav decided to try out his luck. "Ah, Mr. Gustav, 40 is a bit lower than the bargain range. Can we get it up to 45,000? Mr. Kalu asked with a wry smile hung on his face. Gustav still wanted to bargain a little bit more, but he remembered that Mr. Kalu had been nice to him since the start, and also at this time he had enough money to spare, so he decided not to drag it any further. All right, then 45,000 it is, Gustav agreed with a smile. The transaction was done in cash since Gustav didn't have a bank account. Mr. Kalu was shocked that at Gustav's age, he didn't have a bank account, but he was lenient enough to accept the payment in cash. This made Gustav add another activity to his to-do list, opening a bank account. Documents were signed, and they still had to visit a government agency around that area for proper documentation and access before everything was done. Around 5 p.m. they were done with the process and Gustav was given the key to the apartment. Mr. Kalu left after a brief talk with Gustav about some other rules of staying in the vicinity. Gustav stood in the empty apartment with a smile on his face. Now I can finally Before he could complete his words, a notification popped up in his line of sight. Host has completed the goal. Achieved total independence. Another goal achieved, and this time it says total independence? Gustav stared at the notification with a surprised look. Looks like renting an apartment was the last criteria for achieving this goal. Gustav held his chin in contemplation. Goal rewards. New skill unlocked. Silent advancement. 5,000 EXP. Gustav stared at the rewards with a contemplative expression. Silent advancement. Sounds like a movement-related skill. Gustav had a slightly disappointed look because he already had dash and sprint. He was expecting something that didn't have to do with movement. I'll need to test this later, Gustav muttered and proceeded to open host attributes on the system interface. Host attributes. Name. Gustav Oslov. Level. 4 class. EXP. 5260/9500 HP. 170/170 energy. 80 attributes. Strength. 32 perception. 30 mental fortitude. 28 agility. 28 speed. 30 bravery. 28 intelligence. 31 charm. Null attributes point. 36 Gustav nodded after seeing his EXP increase. Around 4,000 more to go, he muttered softly. The rate at which I'm getting EXP is really slow, apart from the daily tasks that give me up to 50, the weekly and monthly quests I completed, and the goals. There should be another way to get more EXP, Gustav pondered. He remembered when he was making more research about Earth's old days video games. Monsters would have to be killed to get EXP, but this wasn't a game. This was real life, and he had no idea where he would come across monsters that he could defeat to gain EXP. He looked at his level again. Only moving up 3 levels in 2 months is not a good pace. My stats are pretty much progressing well, but my increase in levels not so much. I'm like what those old gamers would call a noob. I need to find a way to farm more EXP, if not it will take a long time for me to unlock shop function and that class thingy. I'm sure that also has to do with levels. Gustav closed the system interface after a long contemplation on solutions. He stared at the empty apartment. Time to go shopping for home materials. Gustav smiled and headed out. He was still new to this area, so when he got outside the building, he had to ask around for the closest stores. He walked past 3 streets before arriving at a place where several stores could be on the right and left sides. This place was like a local trading area. Gustav looked around before finding a store that dealer with installments and home appliances. Gustav walked into the store, which still didn't have a lot of customers at the moment. There were rows of gadgets and appliances beautifully arranged within the small store. Gustav could see projector bulbs that were a modern replacement for television sets. There was the webboard, which was a modern replacement for computers. The entire store was packed with different kinds of gadgets and home appliances. Gustav wasted no time in selecting the ones he wanted. At first, the store owner wanted to send him out when he noticed there was a student in school uniform parading around his store and picking different things, but when Gustav brought out a wad of cash, the store owner swallowed saliva and became very polite. He personally showed Gustav around the store, helping him to pick up his desired appliance. Seeing the way money made the store owner become humble, Gustav decided to use him more to his satisfaction. Gustav told the man he wouldn't be able to get everything he bought down to his apartment because they were too heavy for him, and he also needed to buy more things in the other store beside them. At first, the store owner wanted to say Gustav had to find a way by himself, but Gustav threatened to go to another store to get what he needed if the store owner decided not to assist him. Seeing that he was going to lose quite a sum if Gustav decided to go elsewhere, the store owner had no choice but to help. He first called 2 of his male workers to help, but it still wasn't enough, so even he had to assist. They left the store and headed for Gustav's apartment. Each person was carrying about 3 cartons where the goods were kept. They nearly cursed out loud when they found out that Gustav was staying on the 7th floor of a building without an elevator. They would have to carry the goods that high. Normally, Gustav would be able to use the storage device to keep these goods, but he wanted to punish the store owner for almost sending him out earlier. Somehow the store owner turned out to be a chubby man with a pregnant woman kind of stomach. "I'm only helping you exercise." Gustav erased any form of guilt he felt after staring at the store owner who was currently sweating buckets. Several minutes later, they arrived at the top floor and took Gustav's purchases to his apartment. After this, Gustav headed to another store to get other things like cushions, mattresses, wooden structures like reading tables and shelves, etc. Unlike before, Gustav carried all these things back to his new apartment by himself. He was using this to complete the daily task. While he was moving to and fro, people in the neighborhood had been staring at him an intriguing look. His face was unknown around here, so it was pretty much expected. He finally brought the last equipment he needed and was headed towards his apartment with a large box in his hand. He got to the front of the building and was about to head towards the stairs when someone called out to him from the side. "Hello, are you the new person who stays in apartment 48? It was a soft feminine voice. Gustav turned to the right to stare at who had just spoken. Chapter 37. Hello, are you the new person who stays in apartment 48? It was a soft feminine voice. Gustav turned to the right to stare at the person who had just spoken. It was a teenage girl in a blue sweatshirt and green tight-fitted shorts. She looked athletic with her slim figure. Her hair was a touch of silver and pink, giving her a tender look with a soft smile on her face. Another thing that made her stand out was the 2 small horns protruding out of the sides of her forehead. The horns were about 3 centimeters in length, but they had a spiraling kind of look like that of a unicorn. She was coming towards Gustav from the alleyway. "Yes, can I help you?" Gustav questioned after analyzing the girl in an instant. "No, on the contrary, can I help you with that?" The teenage girl pointed at the box in Gustav's hand while speaking. "No thanks, I'm all right," Gustav replied while turning around to head towards the stairs. The girl was surprised at Gustav's uninterested and aloof look. Gustav started climbing the stairs. Surprisingly, the girl followed him. "Hold on, I also live here. We're going to be neighbors, so let me at least assist you," she called out to Gustav from behind. "No assistance needed," Gustav replied without looking back. The girl, who was obviously a stubborn type, ran to Gustav's front and turned to face him while climbing the stairs in a backward motion. "I'm Angie, nice to meet you. I also stay on the last floor," the girl said with a cute smile hung on her face. "Nice to meet you also, Angie," Gustav replied while turning towards the left and climbing up the stairs faster. He passed by Angie's side as he ascended. "Hold on. What about you? What's your name?" Angie questioned Gustav, who had already climbed past her. Gustav froze for an instant before he continued climbing upwards again. "Gustav." The tone of his voice was low but audible. "Gustav? Nice name." Angie giggled lightly and ran up the stairs to stand before Gustav again. "Come on, let me assist you with that," Angie proposed again. "No assistance needed," Gustav said again before turning towards the left and climbing upwards to pass by her side. "Tom, Tom, Tom, Tom." She ran up the stairs again and blocked Gustav. "Come on, we're going to be neighbors. We have to be nice to one another," she said while trying to grab the box from Gustav. "No need," Gustav stated as he moved to the box to the side, dodging her hand. "Come on," she said again while reaching out to grab the box. "No need." Gustav dodged her arm again. "Come on. No need. Come on. No need. Let me help you. Your help is unnecessary." Gustav was starting to get annoyed with Angie trying to help by all means. She pushed herself forward again to grab the box, and this time Gustav moved out of the way completely. Angie exclaimed as her feet tripped on a small metal that protruded out of the stairway. Before she knew what was happening, she had lost her balance, and her body was falling forward. Since they started exchanging words, they had already climbed to the third floor, so falling at this point would make her roll down 50 steps and sustain injuries. Gustav had already calculated this in his mind as he processed her fall. He felt that she was annoying and maybe he should just leave her so she would learn to mind her business, but he remembered she was just trying to help him after all. Gustav shifted the box to his left side with speed, placing it beneath his armpit while holding onto the bottom with his left arm. He quickly turned around and stretched out his right arm. Angie, who was currently falling towards the stairs with her eyes closed due to fear, suddenly felt an arm wrap around her tummy region, preventing her from falling. She exclaimed in surprise while opening her eyes to see her body a few feet away from colliding with the stairs. She turned her face to the side and stared at the owner of the arm, which happened to be Gustav. "Watch where you're going," Gustav said in a low tone while pulling her up. At this moment, Angie felt a wave of embarrassment welling up from within. Her cheeks became flushed as she stared at Gustav, who turned around and started climbing up the stairs again. She stood there staring at his back for several seconds before climbing up quickly to go meet him. Tom, 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 Tom. Gustav was climbing the stairs at a moderate speed, so she was able to catch up to him easily. She shyly turned her face to the left to glance at Gustav, who kept climbing up the stairs with an aloof expression. Thank you," she spoke with a low tone before turning her face towards the side. "H&M, no problem," Gustav replied. She noticed that Gustav was no longer carrying the box in two hands. Instead, it was on his left side. "Looks like he truly didn't need any help," she said internally with a surprised expression. At first glance, everyone would take Gustav as the typical weak-looking guy, even though he was already growing bigger and bigger each day. Seeing the big box in his hands, she had thought it wouldn't be easy for him to lift it to the top, so she decided to come help. Are you a mixed blood also?" she asked with a curious look. "Also?" Gustav replied with a question. "I'm a mixed blood, but you didn't look like one, so I thought you were a normal human," she explained as they climbed up the stairs. "Are looks a criteria for being a mixed blood?" Gustav questioned with a slightly dissatisfied expression. "Oh no, that wasn't what I meant. It's just that I've always wanted to help the weak with my strength as a mixed blood, and I noticed you. Sorry if I have upset you." She noticed that as she spoke more and more, Gustav's face was turning sour, so she decided to stop and apologize. "It's all right," Gustav replied. Her explanation was reminding him of his old self, which was why he had a sour expression earlier. The world doesn't deserve any heroes. Just try to survive first, because without enough power your life is not really in your hands. This was Gustav's thought process after remembering the situation with Hung Jo and the rest. His death would have been swept under the rug had they killed him there due to their powerful backgrounds, but him killing Paul and causing Hung Jo's current state stirred up a lot within the city. He would probably have been caught and killed if not for Miss Amy, which was why his current thought process was to climb to the pinnacle of power on this planet, so no one would ever be able to control his fate or life again. I saw you on the bus earlier. You attend Echelon Academy, don't you?" Angie broke the silence after a while. "H&M?" Gustav nodded in affirmation, but was wondering why she would ask a question that had such an obvious answer since he was currently still in school uniform. That's great. I attend Black Rock schools," Angie said with a smile. Gustav remembered Black Rock schools since it wasn't too far from Echelon Academy. Just like Echelon Academy, Black Rock schools also had mixed bloods, Slarkovs, and humans mixed within. The difference was Echelon Academy had more prestige. As they continued to ascend the stairs together, Angie spoke about her school, her plans for the future, her parents and sibling. Gustav listened to her talks and inputted a few words till he arrived in front of his apartment. Angie was still speaking, but he had to cut her off, saying he still had to arrange his apartment. Angie nodded and waved him goodbye with a smile before heading towards the apartment opposite Gustav's. Gustav had the urge to facepalm after noticing that she was staying with her family right in front of him. "It's going to get noisy around here," Gustav sighed as he walked into his apartment. Gustav started to unpack and arrange everything within the boxes. He put everything in the appropriate place. The mattress, the wall projection screen, reading table, etc. He used Sprint twice to make his work faster, and in 30 minutes, he was done. He stared at the apartment with a smile. On the walls of the living room was a projection of the seas that glowed. It gave off a calming feeling. The black and red leather cushions in the middle of the room. A reading table, placed on the northwest corner of the living room with a circular glass-like webboard placed on it. A shelf was placed at the south corner of the room. Gustav was satisfied to see everything structured the way he wanted. His face suddenly shone a frown. I still need to go pick them up. I can't leave them there. They belong to me after all. Gustav sighed as he spoke. He remembered leaving some of the clothes he had gotten during this period. He put them in the small closet inside his former room in his parents' house. He didn't want to go back there again initially, but now he had to. There were just some clothes, and he could easily buy them back, but he didn't want to leave any trace of himself in that house. Gustav walked out of his newly rented apartment and went downstairs. At this time, it was already past 7 p.m. Chapter 38. Gustav headed to the nearest bus station and traveled back to his parents' house. As expected, it only took about 5 minutes before he got to the stop closest to his parents' home. Gustav walked through the 34th Street headed for the residential area. In a few minutes, he arrived at a house that was 7th on the lineup of houses in this area. The difference between this street and the new one his apartment was located in was, this place was constructed better even though only bungalow-type houses could be seen. It was obvious that this part of the city was more on the urban side. Gustav wasted no time, walking towards the house. He looked at the surroundings and noticed that his mother's car wasn't parked in front, which meant she wasn't home yet. Gustav, who knew where the key was placed, went to get it. He opened the doors and went in straight to the room he spent 10 years holed up in. He wasted no time picking up his clothes from the closet placed behind his tub. He brought out a storage device that was a bit similar to the one he took from Hung Jo. A button type. He had gotten rid of Hung Jo's storage device a long time ago. He didn't want anyone tracing it to him. Gustav put the clothes into the storage device after activating it. He turned around to leave the room, but paused to when he got to the door. He turned back around and observed the room. He walked back towards the tub he had been sleeping in for years and placed his hand on it. He rubbed the edge slightly. "I won't miss you." He turned around after muttering those words and walked out of the room. Gustav walked through the small passageway and was headed towards the door when he sensed something. Calm. He could hear the sounds of footsteps coming from outside. "Looks like they've arrived," Gustav muttered as the door was pushed open. 2 people walked in. They were none other than Gustav's mother and his junior brother, Indrik. They stared at Gustav, who was just coming from the passageway on the other end for a moment before heading towards the couch to sit. They ignored Gustav, who kept walking towards the door. "This trash. You know your brother hasn't been coming back home on time, and you never even showed any concern." Gustav's mother shouted out with a twisted look. "Mother, why do you bother initiating a conversation with him?" Indrik crossed his legs with swag as he spoke in a cool voice. Gustav had paused his steps after hearing them speak. "The trash has to be useful for something at least. Let him show concern." Gustav's mother voiced out once again. "Hey, useless. My only son has received a scholarship to attend MBO Academy for young mixed bloods and is now getting personal training from an Echo-ranked mixed blood." Gustav's mother added with a prideful glare. "Oh, is that why they've been coming late all this time?" Gustav put 2 and 2 together. "You should come and congratulate him. Be good for one thing, even though we all know you're useless." Gustav's mom kept flapping her gums without stop as she praised Indrik. Gustav was standing a few feet away from them. He stood there for several seconds with a dark look on his face before finally saying something. "Good for him," Gustav resumed, walking towards the door. He passed behind where they were seated on the couch. A smile hung on his face as he spoke again. "Congratulations." The look on Gustav's face when he congratulated Indrik was that of unconcern. The smile had a kind of ridiculing element in it. "Step, step, step, step." Gustav resumed, walking forward after saying that. "Hey, you should be on your knees when telling me that," Indrik stated with a disgusted expression. He felt disgusted by the fact that Gustav didn't have the same jealous look he used to whenever he stared at him. That look of reverence was no longer there. Gustav didn't stop walking. He behaved like he didn't hear a word of what Indrik just demanded. "Hey, trash, did you hear me?" Kneel and congratulate me." Indrik looked pissed as he stood up to stare at Gustav, who was still headed towards the door. "Make me," Gustav muttered silently as he turned his head around to stare at Indrik. "Gaze." Indrik flinched back a little, seeing the cold look on Gustav's face. He never thought a day would come when Gustav would stare at him like that. The gaze made a chill run down his spine. Why does he look so fierce all of a sudden? Indrik couldn't wrap his head around the sudden change. Gustav turned back to face the door as he arrived before it and stretched out his hand to open it. All of a sudden, a strange force descended upon Gustav, causing him to pause in his movements. "I said kneel." Indrik shouted out again. He seemed to have regained his spine. He was cursing himself internally for getting scared of Gustav. How can I be afraid of trash? Indrik's right hand was outstretched towards Gustav's direction. Gustav felt the same strange force wrapping around his shoulders and forcibly pushing him downwards. He recognized this power. It was Indrik's. Gustav's knees bent slightly due to the sudden force, but in a second he straightened himself back up, using his shoulders to push the invisible force upwards. Indrik was surprised to see that Gustav wasn't falling to his knees as he had expected. What is happening? Isn't Indrik using his powers now? How is Gustav still standing? Their mother could see Indrik stretching out his hand, which meant he was using his powers, but she didn't understand why she was still seeing the same casual look on Gustav's face like he was unaffected. How is he able to resist my telekinesis? Indrik started walking towards Gustav as he increased the output of his telekinesis. Gustav felt the force pressing onto his shoulder increase. The floor below was starting to creak due to the increase in weight. This should be around 1,000 kilograms of force. Gustav calculated as he turned around and started walking towards Indrik. If this was Gustav's old self, that amount of force bearing down on his shoulders would crush him. Step, 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 step. With every step Gustav took, the shock on Indrik's and their mother's faces increased. How? Indrik channeled his bloodline even more, increasing the force beyond what it was earlier. Gustav paused for an instant while looking down as his face turned dark. He raised his right foot and placed it in front of his left before doing the same for his left. "I have tolerated your excesses as my little brother for a long time." Gustav spoke with an aggrieved tone. "Left you to do as you pleased with me since I was unable to fight back. I was a pathetic big brother, wasn't I? Well, that ends today." He voiced out as he arrived in front of Indrik, who still had his arm outstretched. "As your senior brother, I shall give you what you rightfully deserve when you disrespect an older person," Gustav added as he stared at Indrik in the eyes. Indrik had his widened from shock, but before he could open his mouth to speak, he noticed Gustav's palm swinging towards his left cheek. It was way too fast for him to follow, and before he could react to the speed, contact was made. Pa! A loud slap resounded in the sitting room as Indrik was sent flying towards the far end of the living room. Bang! His back slammed into the wall on the other end as his mouth hung open with his back arched in. His body stayed in that position for a while, as his face showed pain and confusion before his body slid towards the floor. "Since you want these useless parents so bad, you can have them for yourself," Gustav voiced out as he turned around. His mother was still seated on the sofa with her mouth wide open. It was as if a movie was playing out before her. He is able to resist Indrik's telekinesis? Where did he get the strength to perform such feats? Her mind couldn't comprehend what had just happened. She felt she had seen the most unbelievable thing just happen in front of her. How is this possible? Isn't this the same trash I gave birth to? She couldn't react properly to the incident, and she kept staring at Gustav, wondering if he was another person in disguise. Gustav started walking towards the door once again. "As from today onwards, we are not family. If ever cross paths in the future, I will treat you people as I treat everyone else," Gustav said as he got to the door. "We share no tie or relationship, and it will remain that way." Chapter 39. Indrik knelt on the floor with an expression of pain written all over his face. His vision was blurry, and he could smell a metallic liquid running down his nostrils as he stared at the back of a person getting further and further away in his line of sight. Hau, whre did he gt such insane stringith froem. Indrik felt drowsy from receiving a slap from Gustav. He could see about 3 Gustavs walking towards the door while issuing a warning that he couldn't hear properly due to the ringing in his left ear caused by the stinging slap. Gustav opened the door, walked out after voicing out his earlier words. His mother was still seated for many seconds before she remembered that her beloved son was still laying on the floor at the other end of the living room. She quickly stood up and ran to Indrik. She had tears in her eyes as she saw Indrik kneeling on the floor with blood oozing out of his nose and his left eye swollen. "Oh, Indrik areu." She squatted and tried helping him up, but Indrik pushed her away and forcibly stood up. "Don't touch me." He had a look of humiliation on his face as he walked towards his room. Their mother, who fell on her, but after Indrik pushed her away, gritted her teeth with a crazed expression. She couldn't wrap her head around what just happened even after some time had passed. "That trash dares to touch my precious boy," she muttered with a look of craziness. In a few minutes, Gustav had gotten back to his newly rented apartment. He stood inside his apartment with a smile on his face. He didn't feel choked or uncomfortable in this new environment in any way. When he was staying with his parents, he was always in the room he was given, but even with that, the environment was choking. Even when he hardly saw the family he stayed with, and yet the environment was still very inconvenient for him. But now, that was no longer the case. He felt he would finally be able to create nice memories in a place he could truly call home. Gustav walked into his room and changed into pajamas after placing his clothes in his new closet. He calculated his expenses for the day and noted that he had around 150,000 rad left. It was an amount that could last him an entire year, but after listening to Miss Amy's speech in the dojo the other day, Gustav had decided to accumulate wealth before joining the MBO since it might be needed. The only problem was how to go about it. The goal he had in mind for the week now was to make extensive research on the best way to use his abilities to make some cash. He could do things his parents couldn't do since both of them never surpassed the Zulu rank, and he believed that with his current strength he should be among the strongest Zulu ranked in the city right now. It was getting late, but Gustav wasn't in the mood to sleep yet. He walked towards the living room and went to his reading table. Gustav sat on the chair placed in front and tapped twice on the glass-like circular board. Troyan. A holographic projection of a keyboard and a virtual screen appeared above the glass-like board. This was a modern-age computer. It could be taken anywhere since it was very portable. It could also decrease to a pocket size. Gustav had only made use of one in the school, so he wasn't as experienced as others in using the web, but he had decided to learn. "Connect to nearest hotspot?" "Yes." Gustav muttered out these words before tapping his index finger on the yes button that appeared in the air. 3 days later, Gustav was starting to get used to living in this new environment. He had been heading to school with Angie for the past 3 days. He had met Angie's parents, and they were the nice type, just as he expected since their daughter was the same. Her father was a pure Slarkov. Angie got her horns from him, while her mother was a pure human. It was hard to find pure humans and Slarkovs these days, so Gustav was surprised. Angie's parents also happened to work in a laboratory close to the heart of Plankton City. She had a junior brother who was around the same age as Indrik. Surprisingly, he had the opposite of Indrik's character and was even a shy type. Gustav had met some other neighbors during this time. Most were pretty neutral with their attitude towards him. This made Gustav feel like he was in a different world entirely. Does this mean that poor people are the nicest? If that's the case, why are my parents the opposite? Gustav could never wrap his head around this, and sometimes when he thought about it, he would develop a headache. So he just decided to stop thinking about how the world works and focus on his own. Gustav had continued his training with Miss Amy in Gami Dojo. Gustav's feet had already traveled across the 3 floors of the dojo. Whenever he bumped into any one of his age mates practicing there, they would have a look of reverence. More of them had approached him to be his friend, but Gustav still accepted no friendships. Internally, he felt this situation wasn't good. No one was coming to look for his trouble. How was he going to receive future compensations? But Gustav also knew that it was only a matter of time before that happened, because he had noticed that some of them still had looks of dissatisfaction when they saw him. He knew it was only a matter of time before one of those proud kids would come to challenge him again, and Gustav had sworn in his heart that this time, he would receive a larger compensation than he collected from Masuba. Gustav had been researching for jobs he could do to amass more money for the past few days, and he had found several on the internet. The only problem was, most of them were full-time works, and it was impossible for him to drop out of school right now. It was 8 p.m. right now. Gustav laid on his bed like a log of wood inside. Only the virtual reality combat looks plausible, but it would take a long time for me to build enough reputation for others to pay for a challenge, Gustav muttered. He truly felt he might remain a poor bastard and not get enough money before the MBO entrance test took place. At this time, only a bit over 3 months were left. Gustav sighed again. Such short timing. I should have started this earlier, he lamented. While Gustav was still thinking of ways out, he suddenly felt the hair on his skin rise. What's the... Before he could complete his statement, a loud sound was heard. Bang! It sounded like a collapsing building. Kairar! A loud, heart-wrenching scream rang out across the building, causing Gustav to immediately jump up from his bed. Swoof! Gustav immediately ran out of his room and straight outside his apartment. Chatter! Chatter! He wasn't the only one who heard the noise. The neighbors also heard. Several of them could be seen moving towards the source of the noise. Kair! Another scream rang out again, causing the hair on Gustav's skin to rise again. What in the world is that? He wondered internally as he ran towards the stairs. Due to the number of people on the small space stairs, the movement was slow. He could see Angie climbing down at a fast pace from his location. They were about 6 to 7 people before him and her. Gustav turned back around and ran into the passageway. In a few seconds, he arrived at the door that led to the balcony. He wasted no time in pushing it open. Gustav walked in at a fast pace and moved toward the edge of the balcony, which was 20 feet away. He stood before the edge and looked down at the ground from this height. He could sense that the disturbance was coming from the ground floor because he could see people moving towards the apartment there. Gustav breathed in before jumping several feet forward. Chapter 40. He stood before the edge and looked down at the ground from this height. He could sense that the disturbance was coming from the ground floor because he could see people moving towards the apartment there. The height of this building was over 30 meters compared to the building where he fought Paul. This one was like a dwarf. Gustav breathed in before jumping several feet forward. Whoosh! As he descended, the wind blew into his sweater, causing it to inflate. His blonde hair was also afloat due to the wind. Gustav felt like he was flying, and the freedom of falling through the air was out of this world, but it didn't last. Bam! Gustav landed on his feet with his knees slightly bent. The ground slightly quaked as his feet made contact with it, causing a small cloud of dust to form. The loud sound he made upon landing alerted everyone, and they turned to stare at him with awe. Gustav was surprised since he didn't feel the recoil like he was supposed to, but right now he didn't take time to analyze that since the situation at hand took priority. Gustav turned around to face the building that housed his apartment. There was a huge hole on the wall in front. The insides of the apartment that happened to be situated here could be seen even though it was a bit dark. Since Gustav practically used a shortcut to get here, he was among the first people to arrive, which meant no one had gone in to check what was happening. For men were also approaching from behind. Gustav stared at the hole in the wall with a look of bewilderment. His perception was able to spread out more than 20 meters around him, so he could sense something moving within the apartment. That's not human, as Gustav perceived this. A man from behind ran past Gustav towards the hole. The man was only a few feet away from getting to the hole when he suddenly felt a pull from behind. He turned around to see a teenage boy with blonde hair holding onto his right arm. Before he could even react, he was lifted and pulled back with force. Gustav was the one who pulled the man back, which dumbfounded a lot of people around, but before they could say anything, bang! The hole in the wall blasted open wider than before. Debris was sent flying in all directions. Had Gustav not pulled the man back, some of the debris would have made contact with him. But right now everyone's eyes were focused on what came out of the hole. And what came out of it was something Gustav had never come across before since the time of his birth. Tom. The sound of the heavy footsteps resounded in everyone's ear while the visuals of what came out of the hole gave them a huge fright. It was a 2.5-meter-tall creature with brown furs all over its body and dark red eyes. It stood like a human on two legs that were bent backward. For sharp claws dripping with blood could be seen on both its paws, and its body had a kind of robust physique. Its facial look was similar to a wolf, while its body was a bit similar to a bear's due to its robustness. Thud. An arm that had been uprooted from a shoulder dropped from the mouth of the creature. It was dripping with fresh blood. Kairar. Blood wolf mixed breed. Someone, call the cops. The entire place became chaotic immediately after the source of the disturbance was revealed. People started running from place to place in fear. So this is how a mixed breed looks? Gustav had only read about them, but he had never seen how they looked. It didn't cross his mind to check it out on the web, since he had been busy trying to find a job in the last 3 days. The mixed breed glared at people in the vicinity and started walking forward. About 20 people had gathered around here, but none of them were mixed bloods. They were mostly normal humans. Gustav and the mixed breed exchanged glances. Grhhh. The mixed breed growled with a fierce look as blood dripped from its fangs that were about 9 inches long. The men behind Gustav had looks of wariness and were slowly moving back as the blood wolf mixed breed stepped forward. Some people had gone to carry anything they could use as a weapon, even though they knew it was futile when facing a mixed breed. Gustav observed the creature for a few more seconds. I can take it, he said internally, but before he could step forward, someone ran to his front from behind. She stood in front of him. It was a beautiful teenage girl sporting silver and pink hair. Angie, what are you doing? Gustav exclaimed after noticing that it was Angie. I will take it on till the cops arrive. Please get the others to safety, Angie said with a fierce look. At this moment, there was no smile on her face. She looked even more strong-willed than the men around. Before Gustav could reply to her, she had already dashed towards the blood wolf mixed breed. The blood wolf mixed breed also ran towards her after noticing that it had a challenger. Gustav wanted to stop Angie earlier on, but he noticed something. Swoosh. He noticed that Angie's speed was almost as fast as his. The people in the vicinity also didn't try to stop Angie, which was surprising to Gustav also. Emergency quest has been issued. Gustav suddenly saw a notification appear in his line of sight. Emergency quest. Protect the neighborhood. Emergency quest rewards. Hidden. Punishment for failing quest. Hidden. Gustav was surprised again to see this quest, as he had never been given such a quest before. Wait, protect the neighborhood? Gustav thought internally. That means the system wants me to defeat this mixed breed. Gustav came to this conclusion after seeing the quest. This was his plan initially, but Angie had already taken the initiative and wanted to drag out the fight till the cops got here because she knew she wouldn't be able to defeat it, and she thought no other person around here would be able to defeat it either. As Gustav was in his thoughts, a battle was already playing out in front. Angie was faster than the mixed breed from the first exchange observed, and one could see that she seemed pretty experienced. Slash. Slash. The blood wolf kept slashing at her, but its claws kept passing through the wind generated from her body movement. Angie jumped around the place, dodging the attacks of the mixed breed with ease, but she wasn't able to cause it any damage even if she tried. Why are the cops not here yet? Those bastards won't arrive until we're all dead. People lamenting from the background could be heard as the fight between Angie and the mixed breed continued. Angie's parents and her siblings watched from the background with worried expressions. They would have gone to stop the battle if it was possible, but they knew how stubborn their daughter was when it came to this kind of situation. Trying something like that now might even get her killed, so they kept calling the cops to arrive as fast as they could. The battle went on for about 5 minutes, and Gustav noticed that the mixed breed was getting fiercer and fiercer while Angie was getting slower and slower. She must be running out of stamina. Gustav noticed this and was about to step in when the large blood wolf suddenly leaped several meters over Angie's body and landed in front of a man watching on the sidelines. The sudden action surprised Angie, as she had not expected the blood wolf to just leap over her head. The man, who was holding onto a large metal pipe, was scared shitless when the wolf landed in front of him. He couldn't even swing the weapon he was holding. Chapter 41. Angie turned around immediately. In her eyes was a look of dread. Swoosh! She dashed towards the blood wolf and the man who were about 100 feet away from her position. But immediately she dashed out, the blood wolf had already raised its paws and was already slashing his claws down towards the body of the man. Even though Angie's speed was great, she could only cover about 40 feet in a second, which meant it would take her close to 3 seconds to cross 100 feet, but the blood wolf only needed a second for his attack to make contact with the man. Gustav, who happened to be closer to Angie's side, finally moved. If he harms even one of them, it means I will fail the quest, Gustav said internally. Sprint has been activated. -20 EP, full. Gustav sucked in air into his lungs as he slightly crouched. The entire scene had turned quiet again, and even with Angie's great speed, her movement was like a tortoise to Gustav right now. The claws of the blood wolf were slowly descending upon the man's head, and were only a few inches away from making contact. The people in the neighborhood had their mouths opened in fright as their lips slowly circulated, proving that they were speaking but in slow motion. Swoosh! Gustav dashed towards the blood wolf. He passed Angie's side and arrived at the left side of the wolf, whose claws were already close to the neck of the man. Gustav was like a dwarf before the blood wolf. He threw a fierce jab towards its side. Bam! His fist made contact with the blood wolf's left rib area. The wolf whimpered in pain as the force lifted its entire body weight and launched it towards the building 3 meters to the side. Bang! It slammed heavily into the wall. Angie, who was running towards the blood wolf with as much speed as she could muster, only saw a silhouette streak past her, causing a small breeze to blow her hair upwards. Before she knew what was happening, a loud collision rang out, and the blood wolf was sent crashing into the building by the right side. She paused her movement in bewilderment and stared at the person responsible for the incident. Gustav! She exclaimed with a shocked look while staring at him standing with his right arm outstretched. The man who thought his death was certain only saw Gustav appear in front of him like a phantom. His eyes were still widened in shock. Oh my, isn't that our new neighbor? Yes, the one who attends Echelon Academy. Wow, he is a mixed blood like Angie-chan. But he seems stronger. The neighbors in the area were pleasantly surprised, not only at the revelation but at the fact that a single attack could blow the blood wolf away. The wolf's weight caused cracks across the wall. It stood up with a look of pain and anguish while staring at Gustav. Sprint has been deactivated. Gustav deactivated sprint immediately he landed the hit. He didn't want to use up his energy completely since he might still need it for emergencies that may arise. He was just being cautious. So it only got slightly injured even though the force of my punch was multiplied by 2, Gustav analyzed as he stared at the blood wolf. He felt his fist didn't penetrate deep enough. It was like there was an elastic force on the body of the blood wolf that absorbed a part of the force. The wolf dashed towards Gustav with a crazed look, slashing at him with rage. The neighbors were already started to have hope after seeing that another mixed blood was here, but Gustav's next action shocked them. He turned around and fled. Why is he running away? This was the question in everyone's mind. Angie, stay here with everyone, Gustav shouted out as he ran towards the end of the street with the wolf chasing after him. Angie couldn't even follow if she wanted to because not only was their speed fast, her stamina was also running out. Although she was worried about Gustav's normal speed was faster than that of the blood wolf, so he was able to lead it past the street repeatedly. Gustav had already attracted its aggro, so it wasn't ready to give up chase yet. Also, sometimes Gustav would slow down so the blood wolf would think it was catching up, only for him to speed off again. This game of tag continued until they left the residential area and started transversing through the sparse forest behind. Swoosh! Swoosh! They dashed past several trees on the side. They got farther ahead to where the trees were starting to increase in number. After a few more seconds, Gustav suddenly stopped running. Due to the sudden pause, Gustav slid a few inches forward, but he used that to turn around. The blood wolf also paused. In its mind, it wondered why its prey would suddenly stop running. It had a look of delight as it felt Gustav was probably tired of escaping and had decided to accept his death. The blood wolf licked its lips as it moved slowly towards Gustav. All of a sudden, it saw Gustav smiling at it, which baffled it. "Finally, I can test this out. Thank you for being my first test subject," Gustav said with a wide grin plastered on his face. The blood wolf couldn't understand what Gustav was saying, but its senses were telling it that this person in front was dangerous. But looking at Gustav from head to toe, he could only see him as a weak-looking person until it heard Gustav mutter something. Beast transformation bloodline. Right before its very eyes, the blood wolf watched Gustav's body start expanding. Partial mutated bull transformation has been activated. Gustav saw the notification appear in his line of sight as his muscles bugled, tearing open his sweater. His back became broader as his skin started turning red and two elongated horns grew out from the sides of his skull. It only took about 3 seconds before he transformed completely. He was now close to 2 meters in height. His sweater had expanded to the point that some parts had torn apart. Bulging muscles. Broad chest like that of a gorilla. 7 inches tusks. 2 horns. Gustav looked extremely intimidating right now, even though he wasn't as tall as the blood wolf. The blood wolf stared at him with a wary look, but at the same time, it wasn't ready to back down. "I've been wanting to couple this with my current strength and see how strong I would become. You're the perfect test subject," Gustav stated with a thick voice as he walked forward. Gustav knew that without the use of sprint or any speed-related ability, it would be almost impossible to defeat the blood wolf, so he decided to lead it to an empty place so he would finally be able to test out the beast transformation bloodline away from the eyes of others. Also, if he kept using sprint, his energy would be spent in 4 seconds. A war. The blood wolf howled with unwillingness. The arrogant look in Gustav's eyes had angered it. Swoosh. Both of them dashed towards one another. Gustav could feel the increase of his strength and his speed, and he was enjoying it. He leaped 4 meters into the air and threw his fist out as he descended. The blood wolf reacted by swinging its paws upwards to meet Gustav's blow. Gustav twisted his body sideways in midair, dodging the claws of the blood wolf as his fist descended upon its head. Bam! The entire body of the blood wolf slammed onto the ground. Gustav's fist was still resting on its head after descending, pinning its jaw to the ground. The blood wolf grunted in pain as blood dripped down its face from the top of its head. It was feeling woozy after Gustav hit its head. Gustav pulled the head of the blood wolf and lifted its body off the ground. Ugh! Gustav groaned as he carried the full body weight of the blood wolf, which weighed more than 7,000 kilograms. Gustav flung its body towards a small tree on the right side. Bang! The body of the blood wolf slammed into the tree, causing it to snap in half. Chapter 42. Bam! The weight of the blood wolf caused the tree to come crashing down. Gustav purposely attacked its head first because he knew the elasticity of its skin would make it harder to defeat the mixed-breed creature quickly. Gustav dashed towards the blood wolf again. The blood wolf eyes were still woozy from the attacks, but it quickly stood up before Gustav's next attack could arrive. A war. It howled again as it dashed towards Gustav. Slash. Slash. The blood wolf threw out several consecutive slashes towards Gustav. Gustav was able to dodge them with ease, but the wolf seemed to be protecting its head against Gustav, so he wouldn't get the opportunity to attack it again. Gustav had to settle for attacking its body for the time being. Bam! Bam! Gustav slapped the right paw of the blood wolf to his left, causing it to spread its arm apart. Its right chest was opened for a split second. Gustav wasted no time in sending out his palm toward its chest after creating an opening. Palm strike activated. Bam! Gustav's palm slammed into the chest of the blood wolf, causing it to cave in as it was sent flying 3 meters backward. Bam! It slammed into another tree, causing the stem to blast into smithereens. Gustav only had 3 fingers due to the transformation, but it was enough to beat the crap out of the blood wolf. Gustav leaped out again. His body traveled in midair towards the position of the bull as his right foot stomped out. Bam! A small cloud of dust was formed as the blood wolf's head was stomped several inches into the ground with blood flying out of its face in all directions. Gustav lifted his blood-soaked foot from the head of the wolf, who had its face smashed in. Gustav stared at it for a while. That should have done it, he thought internally. Surprisingly, the blood wolf suddenly jumped up and ran in the opposite direction. Its speed was so quick that it shocked even Gustav. Isn't it supposed to be dead? Gustav wondered as he chased from behind. The blood wolf's face that was bloody initially started to go back to normal as the blood smeared all over, retracted back into the injuries. It was healing up at a visible rate. Its left chest area that caved in due to Gustav's palm strike had regained its initial appearance. Gustav was catching up with it, but he had noticed that the blood wolf was regenerating. It can regenerate? He was surprised since he had no information whatsoever on mixed breeds. I can't let it get away. What if it affects my quest? Gustav increased his running speed while activated dash. Dash has been activated. Swoosh. Gustav's increase in speed made him arrive in front of the blood wolf in a few seconds, but just as he wanted to attack it again, the blood wolf howled once more. A war. Its eyes turned from dark red to crimson and started glowing very bright. The darkness further enhanced its fierceness. Its fur turned from brown to red. The creature looked intimidating, but Gustav couldn't sense any threat from it, even with its transformation. He didn't want to waste dash, which only had about 8 seconds left, so he quickly moved forward and threw his fist towards its chest. Bam! The first collision made Gustav understand what change the blood wolf's transformation brought about to its body. It was like he was hitting steel, but Gustav didn't pause because right now he was still very much quicker and stronger than the blood wolf, and with his increase in speed his punches carried more weight than before. Bam! 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 Gustav didn't hold on for even a second as his punches tossed the blood wolf around like a rag doll. Chest, face, abdomen, left rib area, right rib area. etc. Gustav's fist danced around the body of the blood wolf. 1 second. Just as dash got to 1 second, Gustav poured strength into his left arm and swung it out at full force. Bang! His fist slammed heavily into the face of the blood wolf, causing its fangs to break into two as it was sent flying backwards. A skull-cracking sound rang out as blood jetted out from a tiny hole on its head. Bam! Its body collapsed on the ground again, but this time Gustav didn't want to be fooled by it again. He dashed towards its body on the ground. Bang! 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 Sounds of collision echoed in the dark of night. Back in the neighborhood, the cops had arrived and Angie was leading them towards the direction of the sparse forest behind the residential area. An ambulance had arrived, and the people living inside that apartment had been rushed to the hospital. A married couple that stayed in that apartment. Both of them had their limbs and parts of their body bitten off by the blood wolf, but they were still alive. This was because they were mixed bloods, but it was obvious that they were on the weak side. They only survived because mixed bloods were tenacious enough to stay alive for longer periods unless their head was torn off. Normally, they would just be given a healing pill to help regrow their limbs, but due to the late arrival of the health department, they had already lost too much blood and energy, so some health procedures needed to be put in place first before they could give them the pill. Luckily, no one lost their life. The gathering of everyone outside of the apartment was what grabbed the attention of the blood wolf and caused it to come out. The cops were dressed in some black, armored-looking suits, carrying some technological-looking weapons with them. The suit had blue lines all over the body that glowed in the dark of the night as they transversed towards the sparse forest region. They had a sci-fi-like helmet covering their heads. That person must be dead already, Chief. Why are we bothering to do this? And he lead the mixed breed away. There's no way we're going to find it. One of the male cops voiced out, he's not dead. He's a mixed blood, so I'm sure he cannot die easily. Angie voiced out with a dissatisfied look as glared at the male cops with a thin frame. It doesn't matter if he's a mixed blood. That's a level 2 mixed breed. Only a step 3 Zulu ranked mixed blood can defeat it. Is he a step 4? From your description, he's just a kid around your age. He's definitely. Before the male could complete his statement, the cop at the front interrupted. I can sense a person up ahead, approximately at our 10 o'clock 78 meters away. It was a female voice. The rest of them had looks of bafflement because they didn't hear her say animal. They heard her say person. At this point, they were already transversing through the forest of sparse trees. It has to be Gustav. Angie prayed internally because she was starting to get scared after hearing the statement of the cop. She could already tell that Gustav was a Zulu ranked, which shocked her greatly, but she didn't think he would be step 3. Subject is approaching. I repeat, subject is approaching. The female in front was the one with the scanner, reading the environment around them. After a few more minutes of running, they could see a silhouette coming towards their direction up ahead. In a few more seconds, they could finally see the figure of the person clearly, who happened to be a teenage boy with dirty blonde hair and torn blue sweater stained with blood. "Gustav!" Angie shouted out as she ran with a face full of smiles. The cops wanted to stop her at first, since they were supposed to inspect him first, but she was too fast for them. She arrived before Gustav and locked him in a tight embrace. Gustav's eyes widened as received an embrace from the opposite sex for the first time in his life. Her arms were wrapped around his back and her chest pressed tightly to his, with his face only a few centimeters away from the side of her neck. The warmth and her body fragrance were nothing like he had ever felt before. It was sending such electricity to his brains that he forgot to return the embrace, and for that short moment his mind was disconnected from the world. "Hey, are you all right?" Angie moved back and held his shoulders as she questioned with a look of concern. Gustav finally snapped out of his reverie and nodded slightly. "Hey boy, how are you still alive?" The same man who was speaking earlier questioned, but just as he did, he received a punch from one of the cops in front. "Be polite." Another feminine voice was heard as one of them walked forward while removing the helmet on her head. A beautiful feminine face was revealed. "Chief, why did you hit me?" The man grunted out in pain as he held his chest. "Shut up," she said as she walked towards Gustav and Angie. "Are you all right?" she questioned. Gustav stared at the beautiful female who sported red hair with white strands. "I'm good," he answered. "You're not hurt anywhere? Or do we have to call medic?" she questioned again. "I said I'm fine," Gustav answered with a slightly pissed-off look. "Good. Where did the mixed breed escape to? Tell us the direction, so we can go after it," she demanded. They felt the mixed breed must have fled after sensing them approaching, since mixed breeds had good senses. "Escaped?" Gustav questioned. "Yes, in which direction did it escape to?" She repeated her question. "It didn't escape. I killed it," Gustav answered with an aloof expression. Silence. Everyone stared at him with disbelieving expressions, as if he had just spouted out nonsense. "Hey boy, are you having some kind of brain malfunction or something? You're wasting our time. In which direction did it head to?" The same man shouted out from the background again. "I just told you that I killed it." Gustav spoke while bringing out the storage button in his pocket. "Tap." He tapped on it twice, and also tapped a part of the holographic projection that appeared above it. Zing. The battered corpse of the blood wolf appeared with a flash of blue light. "What?" Everyone stared at the body of the blood wolf with a look of bewilderment. Chapter 43. Zing. The battered corpse of the blood wolf appeared with a flash of blue light. "What?" Everyone stared at the body of the blood wolf with looks of bewilderment. The head of the blood wolf was only hanging to its neck by a small thread-like red tissue. Holes the size of a fist could be seen all over its body, and fresh blood still dripped out of them. Its face was extremely sunken. It was obvious that the blood wolf had taken one hell of a beating before its death. Everyone still stared at Gustav with surprise. He must be a step 3 Zulu ranked, or maybe a step 4. They had come to this conclusion after seeing the body of the blood wolf. The cop who was speaking beforehand became dead silent after seeing the proof appear before them. Every rank had 4 steps, and those steps need to be passed through before progressing to the next rank. Right now Gustav was a step 1 Zulu ranked, but these cops had mistaken him for a step 3. This really surprised them because they felt only kids with high-graded bloodlines would be able to reach step 4 so fast, and this part of the city was more on the rural side. It was impossible to find a mixed blood with a very high-graded bloodline here. Even Angie was only D-grade. The reason she was able to go against the blood wolf was due to her bloodline ability being speed-related. When Angie was first born, she had 1 horn, but later she grew another, and when that happened, she became faster in speed. She wasn't even Zulu-ranked mixed blood, yet her speed was close to that of Gustav's. That device in his hand, The woman who happened to the leader noticed the storage button. You attend Echelon Academy? The woman inquired. Yes, any problem with that? Gustav replied while putting the body of the wolf back in his storage device with a slight scoff escaping his mouth. That makes sense now, she thought internally. Echelon Academy has always been known to be the best in raising mixed bloods and also having high-graded ones. If it was another school within the city, she would still be in disbelief, but Echelon Academy was said to have the best students with potential. She had no idea that Gustav was just an E+ grade right now. The other officers too thought it made sense. I am Officer Betty and these are my subordinates. The woman finally introduced herself and reached out her hand to shake Gustav. Gustav returned the handshake and turned to the side to leave. Let's go, Angie, he said as he walked forward. Please wait. Would you like to give us the corpse of the blood wolf for inspection? Officer Betty asked. No, Gustav answered without looking back. Angie followed beside him and stared at the side of his face occasionally. She could sense that Gustav didn't like being around people, and it bothered her, but she didn't want to intrude, so she decided not to ask for now. Such arrogant bastard. That's the way they all are. One of the men voiced out from the side as watched Gustav leave with Angie. This made them further believe that Gustav was truly a student of Echelon Academy, as it has been said to be a school where arrogant brats attend. Well, we can't do anything about it. He did kill it himself, Officer Betty said. I wish I was that powerful without having to use these tools. One of the men sighed in dissatisfaction and adoration as he stared at the departing Gustav. What is going on with these creatures nowadays, Chief? I wonder how they keep getting in. The man with the thin frame spoke. No one knows. HQ won't send us more troops to work with and conduct a proper investigation since this place happens to be on the more local side. Also, this should be the work of the MBO, but those bastards won't bother showing up for things like this. Officer Betty brought out a cigarette and lit it as she spoke. Puff. Her look of frustration calmed a bit as she blew out a small cloud of smoke from her mouth and nostrils. Chief, we're still on duty, one of the men reminded her. Shut up, she said and threw the cigarette to the floor. We still need to write down a report, so Sam, Brian, and Mika go ask the neighbors about the incident. Fred and Rain, scout this area. Officer Betty gave out those set of instructions and started walking in the direction of Gustav and Angie. The police force was different from the MBO. They had different duties. MBO dealt with anything related to bloodline, while the police force was equipped to deal with normal crimes. What happened in this neighborhood was supposed to be dealt with by the MBO, but the neighborhood didn't think of calling the MBO because it would be a waste of time. The MBO detested this part of the city, and when it came to weak monsters like a level 2 mixed breed, they would ignore it, feeling it was beneath them to bother themselves with such weak creatures. Most of the officers in the police force were low-ranked mixed bloods. A lot of them didn't surpass the Zulu rank, including the bunch that arrived here. Some of them never even got to channel their bloodline past the 3rd point, but their equipment and technological arms made up for that. Still, the police force was seen as low due to this factor, and most failed mixed bloods tend to go for it, rather than trying to join the MBO. Gustav and Angie discussed the incident on the way back to the neighborhood, and Gustav realized that this wasn't the first time this was happening. It had been happening for a while now. Occasionally mixed breeds would find a way to cross the border, and this part of the city always suffered from that. She even added that residents around this area had lost their lives to such incidents in the past. This had Gustav wondering how such a situation had been happening, but was unknown to the general public. Was never broadcasted by any news channel, neither was it seen on any media platforms. Did they not complain to the authorities? How did such situations get swept under the rugs? Gustav couldn't understand how and why the situation hadn't been rectified. Angie explained to him that the situation only occurred occasionally, and since the mixed breeds never infiltrated past the edge of the city, the government were all right with it. Even though 1 or 2 people died, it wasn't a big deal for them. Gustav had always known that society was shitty, so he wasn't all too surprised by this. They later arrived in the neighborhood, and everywhere became chaotic again after the neighbors saw that Gustav was all right. Right now, up to 50 people within the neighborhood had gathered around their building. People started thanking Gustav for leading the blood wolf away. The man whose life Gustav saved was in tears, thanking Gustav. Gustav was new to this kind of situation, so he didn't know how to respond. He only smiled and nodded at them. A lot of other young people his age flocked around him and praised him with reverence. Host has achieved charm. Gustav finally saw a notification he had been waiting on for the past 2 months appear in his line of sight. He couldn't express the way he felt at this time, but it wasn't a bad feeling in any way. Till around 10 p.m. in the evening before things settled down. Chapter 44. The neighborhood later found out that Gustav killed the blood wolf and were pleasantly surprised. They treated Gustav with more respect after hearing that. The cops had questioned people about the incident, including Gustav and Angie. It wasn't till around 11 p.m. before people started entering their apartments. Gustav was invited by Angie's parents for dinner that night. He wanted to decline initially, but he couldn't refuse Angie's persuasion. Even though he found it annoying, it was a trait he still admired about her. It was Gustav's first time entering their apartment so obviously. He looked around the living room. He noticed that it was no different from his in size. It also looked quite humble, unlike his that had a lot of expensive gadgets and the likes. The meal was ready in no time, which Gustav was grateful about because Angie wouldn't stop talking. They proceeded to the dining and started feasting on the meal after a small family prayer was done. All this was still very new to Gustav. He never even knew that family prayer was said before a meal since he couldn't remember the last time he had one of those. Seeing everyone around him dig in, Angie, her mother, father, and brother, gave Gustav a kind of weird feeling, but not in a bad way. He also joined in. Gustav, what about your parents? Why do you live alone? Their father, who happened to be a very outspoken person, was the first to ask this question while they were having dinner. I don't have parents, Gustav answered, and proceeded to place another spoonful of food in his mouth. The dining area became silent for a while, but Gustav didn't seem bothered as he was still eating his food without a look of worry. Sorry about that, Angie's father said with a look of concern. They all wondered how he was living alone, how he was able to afford an apartment and living expenses, but they felt they might intrude on his privacy even more, so no further questions were asked. There's no need for apologies. Gustav waved his hand to dismiss the weird atmosphere. He really isn't bothered? Angie stared at Gustav's face for a while before looking down to focus on her food. She didn't know why, but she felt Gustav seemed quite pitiful. In a few minutes dinner ended, but Angie's father still wanted to talk to Gustav about something. Gustav later went back to his apartment around midnight. The last night's event opened his eyes more to the nature of the world. He wondered if he would have truly tried to save people if the system hadn't given him the quest, or if he was powerful enough. After joining the MBO, would he also ignore such things happening? He knew for sure that he would have helped Angie, but what of the others? Gustav felt his state of mind had been kind of messed up since he killed Paul. The conscience and human emotions he used to feel towards people were slowly becoming distant. There were only 2 people he mostly showed his warm side to, which were Miss Amy and Boss Danzo. Also, he was slowly starting to warm up to Angie. He didn't know if it would continue like this or not, but he had decided not to overthink. He would figure everything out with time. His main goal right now was to become powerful enough so no one would control his fate or how his life is supposed to be. He wanted his life to go in the direction he willed. If someone was going to piss him off, he didn't want to have to hide anymore. The sufferings he had gone through in the past, he had promised to never let it happen again. The next morning, Gustav and Angie went to school together again. Angie has memorized the exact time he left the house and made sure to bump into him every morning so they would leave together. Angie noticed that Gustav seemed to look more attractive to her than yesterday, but she just couldn't figure out why. What she didn't know was, she wasn't the only one who had such thoughts. Even when they were walking through the streets, anyone who noticed Gustav could not stop staring at him. Even if they took their face away, they would still secretly stare in his direction after he had passed. Gustav was starting to enjoy Angie's company, even he still found her annoying since she always went out of her way to help others. There was a time he got to school late because she decided to chase a pickpocket who stole from a grandma. She always wanted to help even when it wasn't needed. Gustav's daily activities resumed as usual. The kitchen was the first place he visited as expected. After that were classes. The classes today seemed to lack life since none of them were that of Miss Amy's. Gustav had lost interest in normal classes except for science. He still found science interesting, especially since he's been having some thoughts lately. He's been thinking of turning the second empty room into a kind of small science lab. Last night when he killed the blood wolf, that was where he placed the body. He couldn't help but smile after remembering the bountiful rewards he received as his mind went back to yesterday's events. Gustav stood in front of the body of the blood wolf. His fists were dripping with blood, and he was still in the mutated bull form. The blood wolf had stopped regenerating, and it was on its last breath. I knew there was going to be a limit. Gustav was studying the regeneration of the blood wolf since he also had regeneration. He had cut himself before to test out his regeneration and noticed that based on his energy points, he could regenerate infinitely. The problem was his regeneration was slower, which meant it wouldn't be able to keep up in a fierce battle if he was receiving serious injuries at a fast pace. He knew this was because regeneration was still at level 3, which made him hopeful about future levels bringing faster regeneration. Gustav walked forward, raised his right foot with intensity, and stomped down on the neck of the blood wolf with force. Bam! Splurt! Blood splattered in all directions as the blood wolf's head was almost completely uprooted from its neck. Even though it wasn't completely uprooted, the wolf was already dead since it couldn't regenerate from this. Emergency quest complete. Rewards: 5,000 EXP. Plus 2 attributes points added to all attributes. Level up for all skills and abilities. Recreation ability now operational. Host has leveled up. Gustav was wowed by the rewards, but before he could even start to check them, another notification popped up. You killed a blood wolf mixed breed. 5,000 additional EXP. The last notification was the one that shocked him greatly. Another beast transformation bloodline found. Does host wish to add mutated bloodwolf transformation to beast transformation bloodline? Yes/no. Gustav noticed his foot was still on the blood and gory mess. The bloodwolf's neck had turned to. He lifted his foot, and the last system notifications disappeared. When he placed his foot back there, the system notification appeared again. This means I can also add mixed breeds to the beast bloodline I collected from Paul. Gustav was very excited when he figured this out at that time. Yes, he quickly called out in his mind. Extracting mutated bloodwolf. Extraction process. 1%. Extraction process. 50%. Gustav watched as the bar went up till it got to 100%. Mutated bloodwolf has been successfully added to beast transformation bloodline. After the completion, he put the bloodwolf's corpse in his storage device and started heading back. Finding out about being able to add mixed breeds to his beast transformation bloodline made Gustav feel a rush of excitement run through his body. He had done extensive research on mixed breeds the night before, and now he had another goal in mind. This neighborhood might actually be a blessing in disguise, Gustav thought with a wide grin on his face. Chapter 45. This neighborhood might actually be a blessing in disguise, Gustav thought with a wide grin on his face. At the end of the day, Gustav was walking towards Miss Amy's office as usual. On his way, he received a lot of glares from different students as usual, but this time, it was a different kind of gaze. The females glanced at him with subconscious desire, while the males glanced at him with a slight look of envy. Everyone couldn't help but wonder, why does he look so attractive today? What Gustav didn't know was his method of walking, the way he stared with a look of focus, the aloof expression, everything action performed by him had improved into an attractive kind of way that made others notice him, even if they didn't want to. His style of walking now was very graceful. His dirty blonde hair had a certain glow to it. Its silkiness stood out. It was smoothly packed to the back with some strands falling in front of his face. Gustav's blonde hair was previously the falling type that almost reached his shoulder. He woke up this morning and decided to style it this way instead. Gustav passed by the side of a female in smooth black long hair. Her face was so beautiful that it could be mistaken for a doll. Her skin was pale white, and her face was the heart-shaped type with a pointed nose. Her looks were not short of perfect. She was about 54, and her body seemed to have matured completely at first glance due to the massive peaks in front of her chests. She turned to the side to stare at Gustav, who had just passed. She was dazed for a few seconds seeing his elegance, but she quickly came back to normal. What's wrong with me? I already turned him down in the past. She pursed her lips and turned around to face where she was headed. But did he not see me at all? He didn't even spare me a glance. She turned to the side to stare at Gustav, who kept walking forward without turning to stare at anyone. I refuse to believe that this trash will not stare at me even once. As she walked forward, she kept staring at the side, waiting for Gustav to turn around and stare at her, but to her disappointment, Gustav kept walking forward without doing that. She found it strange and still kept staring at Gustav's back for a few seconds before a loud shout was heard. "Hey, Yuhiko!" A female student sporting chestnut-colored hair called out from ahead while waving her hand. "I'm coming," she replied and turned back around to start walking towards the other female student. "What are you looking at?" The other female student questioned after noticing Yuhiko's weird state of turning around occasionally. "Nothing, Mara. Let's head to the dojo," Yuhiko replied and focused her sight forward. "All right, remember you still have to duel with that Masuba, and you have to defeat him or you'll go on a date with him," Mara said with a frown. "I don't date idiots. Especially one who lost to an F grade," Yuhiko said in disgust. I still wonder who that F grade is. They say his physical strength is higher than a normal mixed blood, and he was able to defeat Masuba in a second. The only problem is he is always on the last floor and doesn't like to associate with anyone, so there is no way to figure out whether this is true or not, Mara analyzed with an intrigued look. It doesn't matter because it doesn't change the fact that a B grade lost to an F grade. Do you think I would also lose to whoever that person is? Yuhiko had an intense look as she questioned Mara. Of course not. Whether he has an insane physical strength or not, battling is not all about strength. After all, I'm sure you would win, Mara said with a smile. That Masuba is a disgrace yet still flaunts and has the guts to ask me on a date. I will make sure I crush him today, Yuhiko said with a look of disgust. Gustav got to Miss Amy's office after a few minutes. On his way, he had been thinking of how to use atomic manipulation bloodline in a battle, so he wasn't so focused on his environment. He knew he passed by the side of Yuhiko, who was hailed as the most beautiful girl in the entire school. Also, the same girl who crushed him 3 years back, but he was too busy with his thoughts to even care about glancing at her. Yuhiko was surprised since there had never been a time when Gustav saw her that he wouldn't stare at her with adoration. His eyes would be full of praise until she was out of sight. She found it a bit bothersome, but she enjoyed being worshipped, so inwardly she would smile while totally ignoring Gustav. She had expected this to happen again today. Miss Amy and Gustav headed to the dojo afterward. 2 hours after getting to the dojo, Gustav was about to finish training for the day. He had already sparred with Miss Amy, which of course ended in his loss. Miss Amy was always merciless when training Gustav, and Gustav's speed didn't come close to hers in any way. Even if he was to use sprint, he still wouldn't be able to touch Miss Amy. He would receive barrages of kicks and punches that always made him feel like he was hit by a moving train. Miss Amy would say after defeating him, "I'm not even using up to 20% of my full strength, you weakling." Gustav was always amazed by her strength. The most absurd part was, Gustav had never seen Miss Amy use her bloodline abilities. Whenever they sparred, she would always dodge his attacks as if she could predict them. She only trained Gustav in combat, but she allowed him to make use of his abilities, which she still didn't understand till now. Gustav only sparred for 1 hour with Miss Amy, and he used the rest to train solo. He was currently attacking a robotic-looking machine. This was a similar battle android to the one Indrik battled against when the inspectors arrived close to 3 months back. He had been using disintegration ability repeatedly. He wanted to train it well enough to use in combat, but it was proving impossible. This was the ability tied to the bloodline he got from Ben. The day he extracted this ability, he found out that it was very slow and impractical to use in combat. It was a very good ability, but it's slow. The day he killed Paul, he used this ability to disintegrate billions of Hung Jo and Ben's brain cells. The ability was able to make anything it came into contact with disappear. Gustav had been testing it out repeatedly. It was very slow and causing disintegrations from an atomic level, Luckily, Gustav only focused on the cerebrum when he was using it, which made it faster. When he tried disintegrating something larger, it would take time before he could completely make it disappear. Bam, bam, bam. Gustav's hand glowed a milky light that only he could see as his palm struck the 2-meter-tall android. It was barely visible, but whenever he struck a part of it, that part would reduce a bit. It would compress slightly, but it wasn't due to his strength. It was due to the disintegration ability. Gustav squatted as he dodged the swung-out left arm of the android and threw out his palm towards its side. Bam! Contact was made again. This time the left side of the metallic android sunk in by an inch. It's improving, but Gustav was in his thoughts and was about to throw out another attack when he heard voices coming from outside. He paused his attack and moved backward. Activate sleep mode, Gustav said. Going into sleep mode. A robotic voice was heard as the android shut down. Dash here? Dash yes, this is the dojo. Dash, just call him out already. Dash, you call him out? Isn't that why you're here? Gustav could hear the voices of some people coming from outside. Young masculine and feminine voices could be heard in some sort of argument. Looks like they finally grew some balls. Gustav turned around and started walking towards the door. Time to collect more compensations. A wide grin could be seen on Gustav's face as he got to the door of the dojo and slid it to the side. Chapter 46. Looks like they finally grew some balls. Gustav turned around and started walking towards the door. Time to collect more compensations. A wide grin could be seen on Gustav's face as he got to the door of the dojo and slid it to the side. Immediately, Gustav slid open the wooden doors. What appeared in his line of sight were 2 boys and girls. They looked to be teenagers like him, and he could recognize 2 of their faces. 2 of the boys were among the students that watched the fight between him and Aurora, along with Masuba. The other 2 girls were unknown to him. The 4 of them immediately stopped arguing after seeing Gustav appear. Is that him? The girl on the right sporting black and purple hair questioned one of the boys. Yes, he's the one. One of the boys who had a chubby look answered. What? He looks so tiny and weak. The second girl who sported brown hair spoke with a look of ridicule. The 2 boys' faces paled as they heard that. I thought it was going to be someone more intimidating. The girl with black and purple hair spoke again. He looks like a pretty boy. How could Masuba lose to this feathered-looking person? The other girl sporting brown hair spoke again. The both of them spoke like Gustav wasn't standing in front of them. The faces of the boys paled again upon hearing the conversation of the girls. They stared in Gustav's direction with a frightful look. Surprisingly, Gustav didn't even look bothered. He just stared at the girls like they were some clowns performing a circus act. He's right here, you know? The chubby boy couldn't bear it anymore and finally spoke since he was afraid of Gustav misunderstanding the situation. He didn't want Gustav to think he was also among those insulting him. What's this? You're scared of him? The female sporting brown hair questioned with a look of disgust. If you don't have anything tangible to say, I will return to my training. I have better things to spend my time on than wasting it on watching a circus act play out in front of me. You 2 should get your circus monkeys out or here, Gustav said to the 2 boys and turned around to enter the dojo once again. Hiss, did he just call us? How dare this? The female on brown got mad immediately and wanted to approach Gustav, but the other girl dragged her back. Remember the rules? The girl sporting purple and black hair questioned with a reminding tone. When the girl on brown heard that, she calmed down. One of the rules forbids fighting within the premises of the dojo. Fighting was only allowed through duels, and failure to comply would result in a permanent ban. Don't worry, Senior Yuhiko will take care of him for us. The girl sporting purple hair whispered in the ears of the other girl as she smiled. Gustav's ears caught what they said even though he was already about to close the door. Perception had increased his 5 senses, so he would hear even the tiniest of whispers so long as they were within the range of detection. Please wait. The boys were the first to call out to Gustav before he could close the doors. What is it? Gustav asked while turning his head to the side. Masuba would like to invite you to watch his duel with Yuhiko on the 2nd floor, the chubby boy answered. Yuhiko would also like to invite you to watch the duel. The girl sporting purple and black hair spoke. Is that why you all are here? Gustav asked. Yes, the group of four nodded. Not interested, Gustav turned around after answering. What? The two girls were surprised that Gustav would turn them down even after hearing the name of the person who was inviting him. No one in the dojo could claim they hadn't heard of the most beautiful and powerful girl in the dojo. The boys weren't surprised as they were already used to this cold attitude since Gustav had turned down their friendship several times. Please, Senior Gustav, Masuba is willing to do anything for you to attend. The other boy wearing a pair of glasses spoke. Oh, Gustav looked interested after hearing that. Is that so? He came out of the dojo again as he questioned. The boys nodded in affirmation. That's good. But before I can decide to come with you, these rude girls must apologize, Gustav demanded. What? I'm not apologizing to this. Before the girl with brown hair could even complete her statement, Gustav interrupted her. All right, we're done here. Gustav turned around once again to head in. Ah, please wait. The boys called out to him, but he didn't answer. He went in and slammed the door shut. It was after he went in that the brown-head girl realized her blunder. You know Senior Yuhiko will take it out on you when she hears the reason for us failing to bring him with us, the girl on purple and black hair said with a sigh. Even the boys were sulking because they knew Masuba was likely to punish them if they failed. The girl on brown had a look of fright before speaking. Let's call him out so we can apologize. I don't think we have any other choice right now. They started knocking on the doors after that. After a few seconds, Gustav came to answer them again. This time a look of annoyance could be seen on his face as he demanded for the girls to apologize on their knees this time. How could you? The girl sporting brown hair was about to speak again when Gustav interrupted. I'm going back, and then he turned around to leave once again, but this time the girl sporting purple hair quickly reacted by kneeling and dragging the one with brown hair down with her as they begged for forgiveness, even though looks of unwillingness were written all over their faces. Gustav was smiling inwardly after seeing this, but his outward expression was still the same. Let's go then. On the second to the last floor, a small stage that was similar to the one Gustav and Aurora had their first duel was placed in the northwest corner of this floor. A group of young boys and girls could be seen gathered around this stage. There were about 20 of them, and they seemed to be waiting for something, or in this case someone. Two of these people were Masuba and Yukiho. Masuba was on the left side of the stage while Yuhiko was on the right. The same inspectors that played as referees for Gustav's and Aurora's fight were also present, and they were all waiting for the same person before the duel commenced. Yukiho had a look of annoyance on her face. What's taking so long? I can't stand this idiot staring at me in this kind of way. I want to stomp on his face as quickly as I can, she thought in her mind as she stared at Masuba, who was also exchanging glances with her. Masuba was staring at Yuhiko with a longing gaze. He stared at her like she was a holy being, a deity that wasn't supposed to exist on the earth, and truly Yuhiko looked the part. She was unrealistically beautiful. Just look at this idiot. He practically has drool leaking out the side of his mouth. No different from how that guy used to look at me. Humph. An image came to her head, but she looked quite disturbed as another image interloped with the one she first pictured. Just what was? She didn't get to complete her thought when loud voices were heard in the vicinity. Dash, he's here. Dash, is that him? Dash, wow. He looks quite weak. Dash, how could Masuba have lost to him? Dash, but he also looks pretty. Everyone turned around to stare at the group of 5 who had just arrived. The person in the middle was who they were referring to. Yuhiko stared at the group approaching with a look of shock visible on her face. How could he be the one? Chapter 47. Yuhiko stared at the group approaching with a look of shock visible on her face. How could he be the one? Yuhiko stared at the blonde boy in the middle approaching with an unbothered expression. Another surprising issue for her was Gustav was staring in her direction, but there was no look of adoration and worship visible like before whenever he saw her. In fact, there was no expression. She couldn't read his thoughts through his expression. Whether he was happy or sad to see her, excited or angry, there was no reaction whatsoever. He was staring at her, as if he had never seen her before, which made her feel dumbfounded. "Hey Gustav, over here!" Masuba waved at Gustav as he called out. This confirmed Gustav's identity, which Yuhiko was questioning in her heart earlier. Gustav walked over to the left side, ignoring the glares and words of the crowd. "My compensation for attending your duel is 20,000, Gustav immediately voiced out once he got to Masuba's side. Masuba had a wry smile on his face as he heard that. All right, he nodded after answering. "And for every 2 minutes I spend here, the amount increases by 5,000, Gustav added. Masuba's eyes nearly budged out of their sockets, but after a second he nodded in defeat. "I hope you take your time when battling her, although I doubt that will happen," Gustav said internally. "Is that the person you lost to, Masuba?" A female who was standing beside Yuhiko questioned with a look of disgust. "Yes, this is Gustav." Masuba acted as a bridge to introduce Gustav to both Yuhiko and the girl beside her. He had no idea that they already knew Gustav. Ha 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 ha. "This is truly funny. You lost to trash and you believe you can win, Yuhiko? You must be dreaming." The female besides Yuhiko, who was sporting chestnut-colored hair, stared at Gustav like he was a fraud. Gustav returned the stare with a look of unconcern. "He's just a useless bum who only knows how to take bloodline enhancement drugs. How is he even here in the first place?" She voiced out again. The question she asked was also what Yuhiko was wondering. How is he here? How is he able to gain access to the last floor? Masuba was dumbfounded by the statement the girl made. He turned to stare at Gustav before looking back at the girls. Bloodline enhancement drugs? That makes sense. There's no other way I can see an F grade defeating a B grade. So Masuba was just defeated unfairly? The students within the vicinity spoke amongst themselves after hearing that. Masuba had already realized that they must have known each other before this. With the place getting chaotic, one of the supervisors finally spoke. "Gustav won the duel with Masuba fair and square. Do not discredit a genuine person's win," Supervisor Bola disclosed. He was a supervisor, so he would know this much. If a person was to use enhancement drugs, he would be able to tell at first glance. His disclosure made the place quiet down. There was no way anyone would believe the girl over Supervisor Bola. Some of them even started giving her weird looks, wondering what she was aiming at. "If he is trash, then everyone must be trash too, since I'm pretty sure he would defeat everyone here." Masuba laughed as he spoke, causing everyone to turn speechless again. They thought about what he said and realized that most of them here couldn't even defeat Masuba. The strongest spectator here would only tie with him, so his words kind of make sense, but they still had unwillingness in their hearts. The chestnut-haired girl gritted her teeth in annoyance. "Yuhiko, remember our plan. Now that we know who the F grade is, the plan must be executed with twice the intensity," she whispered in the ears of Yuhiko. "You don't have to tell me, Kira. That look on his face irks me to no end," Yuhiko said while staring at Gustav, who didn't even try to defend himself when the others were speaking. "Gustav, do you think I will win?" Masuba asked with a smile. He seemed to have taken Gustav as his friend already with the way he was speaking. "No, you will lose," Gustav answered bluntly. Masuba felt like he was shot in the head after hearing that, but he didn't back down. "Let the participants of the duel climb onto the stage now," Supervisor Samsuna spoke while making gestures at the stage. Yuhiko and Masuba climbed onto the stage after hearing that. Masuba smiled as he stood in front of Yuhiko. "To think you can defeat me when you got beat up by trash. Just like Kira said, you must be deluded," Yuhiko stated with a dark look. "You're still calling him that. I hope you don't end up as I did." Masuba shook his head in pity as he spoke. Supervisor Samsuna questioned if both sides were ready, which they reacted to by nodding. "Let the duel begin," he added. "Hiya." Masuba was dashed towards Yuhiko immediately after the go-ahead was given. Black scales suddenly started appearing all over his body as he dashed forward with speed, while Yuhiko reacted by removing a strand of hair from her head and stretched it forward. "Swayai." Masuba swung out his palm at this time towards Yuhiko. The strand of hair Yuhiko stretched out suddenly turned into a baseball bat, which she swung towards the incoming hand. Bam! The bat slammed fiercely into Masuba's right arm, but was smashed to pieces upon making contact. Masuba smiled as his arm kept moving forward towards Yuhiko. Zuihii. Yuhiko crouched her body downwards, dodging the arm as she pushed out her right hand, slamming it onto Masuba's right side. Bam! Contact was made, but there was no impact. This was due to Masuba's bloodline that gave him protective scales which also made him faster and stronger. In his battle with Gustav before, he didn't even have the chance to activate it before he was knocked out. Masuba smiled. "You will have to do better than that to hurt me," he said while swinging his right leg upward to meet with Yuhiko's arm. Bam! His right leg kicked her arm away. He was about to follow up with another attack when he suddenly felt heavy. Dumb. He fell to the ground on his knees with a shocked reaction. Gasp. Did his clothes just get turned into a metal weight jacket? Someone voiced out from the crowd. That was when Masuba noticed his upper clothes were now black and metallic in kind of jacket form. Yuhiko had used her ability to change his clothes to this upon making contact earlier. It weighed more than he could handle, which affected his mobility. He wanted to pull it off of himself, but before he could do so, he noticed a metal bat swinging towards his face while he was still in his kneeling position. Bam! The metal bat crashed directly into the left side of his face, smashing his nose and several of his teeth in the process. Masuba fell to the ground while spitting out broken pieces of teeth. Yuhiko was the one holding onto the bat. Masuba's left face was brutally bruised. His eye had swollen up and was looking black like that of a panda, but he wasn't ready to give up yet. Form 2, he called out in his mind as the scales on his body suddenly increased in number, each one becoming smaller than before. He grabbed onto the metal jacket, ripped them apart, and threw them to the side before jumping up with intensity. "You should have just stayed down." Immediately, he jumped up. A soft feminine voice drifted into his ears. Yuhiko was holding onto a pebble which she was lifting upwards. Masuba had decided he wouldn't give her the chance to do whatever she was planning and dashed out, but immediately he did. She threw the pebble towards him. "Swai, what sort of dumb joke is this?" Masuba smirked as he dashed forward while watching the pebble travel towards him in midair. All of a sudden his smile started to warp. First from a smile to a look of confusion, to awe and then fear, because right before his very eyes the pebble was increasing in size as it traveled towards him. Masuba wanted to move to the side to dodge, but it was already too late as the pebble had already transformed into a huge boulder that covered his entire line of sight. Bam! The boulder slammed into Masuba and kept moving forward without reducing speed till it knocked him off the stage. "Yuhiko wins this duel," Supervisor Samsuna shouted out. Supervisor Bola had already dashed towards the boulder and slammed his palm into it, causing it to break to pieces. Masuba had passed out already on the ground. His scales retracted into his body, which was covered with blood. The crowd stared at Yuhiko with adoration and cheers rang out. They had already expected this, even though Masuba was also a B-grade like her. Yuhiko's bloodline was a unique creation type that gave her the ability to transform matter into whatever she wished. So even the air could be morphed into what she wanted if the right requirements were met. Supervisor Bola had placed a healing pill in Masuba's mouth, and he started healing up at a visible rate. Yuhiko did not leave the stage after winning. She stood there staring at a person in front. Everyone followed her line of sight and noticed she was staring in Gustav's direction. "Gustav, I challenge you to a duel," she voiced out while giving Gustav an intense glare. "You're tuning in to the Mystic Fist YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.